Namaskar. Welcome to another edition of Navavimash podcast. So we are back again today for the episode 10, chapter 10 of our lecture series on Christianism, and we have with us Dr. Bijeet Prasantha, to
Namaste.
continue the lecture series. Today is the 10th part. I think we had discussed about slavery and other things in our Saturday session. So today, what we have in store for us, Vijita?
Right. Namaste. So let's dedicate today's podcast to S.L. Bhairappaji. And Obviously, he wrote a lot of things to expose this sort of this frailty in the name of secularism. And following his works, today we are going to expose this chameleon like adaptability of Christianism and how it penetrated into our socio political structure through this Trojan horse, which is called secularism, right? So we have already done a detailed philosophical discourse and discussion on the topic of secularism and how it is assisting in Hindu Janavidvans, right? You can, in one of our previous sort of podcasts, so you can have a look. It is there in our viewers already. So today we are going to sort of add on that, um, and we are going to sort of study the history, how it sort of penetrated, how the liberalism and from there we got into this liberal individualism, and then it framed into this whole liberal secularism format, and how Indian state, while writing and debating about the draft of the constitution in the Constitution Assembly 1948-49, how they sort of they could not come up with any specific definition of this word secularism, and then how over time it started to get interpreted by the judges, and in the process how these judges, the judiciary and the court, started to assume positions higher than the Hindu priests in through their judgment in defining what secularism mean, what Hindu dharma mean, and all of these judgment, more or less, they actually catered to the obviously to the Abrahamic interest, because you know that judiciary works on records and references and legacies of previous judgments, for example, right? And Obviously, we adopted a colonial British like Abrahamic structure in our constitution. They, with that same sort of scriptural mindset, ki everything, whatever essential practice or essential doctrine of a religion has to be there in some scripture. Give us that scripture, otherwise we don't value local traditions, we don't value your native belief, we don't value your kingbadantis, your sort of quote unquote heresies, we don't believe in your proverbs, your maxim, your culture. You show us a draft of a scripture, and then only we will believe what you are talking about your religion. So this approach, this scriptural Abrahamic approach to judge and define a religion has historically done great damage when we talk about sort of Hindu dharma, right? Which is our very native belief and religion and culture and livelihood, everything together. It is a wholesome package of our life, but obviously the judiciary and the polity, the whole administrative structure, they don't care about that, because they want to control top down, right? They have some top down agenda, just like British had some top down agenda. And in the process, what has happened, they sort of imposed their own sort of Abrahamic belief upon us. um, and the tool that they have used in this to sort of implement this is secularism, right? So we are going to sort of what do you call it, uh, peel up one layer up over others. So we are going to enter into the very core through different judgments and constitutional debates, etc., to sort of prove whatever I just said. Okay, the synopsis of today's lecture. Okay, right. So as we have already said, and we have discussed from the this guy D. Roover's book, and from JSI Deepak's discourse on this as well. Ki actually, secularism, uh, when it was invented, the sort of Christian understanding of this word was that ki, okay, there has to be a state and there has to be religion, and the state and religion has to be separated because religion is eternal, right? First of all, the word religion is a appropriation because as per the Greco-Roman ancient philosopher Cicero, religion is something which obey the order of the state, the order of the cosmos, and bind them together to give you something which does not subvert values. But these Abrahamic cults, they have only one and one ambition: is subversion of values in order to homogenize the whole population in the globe. Okay, so when obviously when you start to homogenize people, you are actually snatching away some part of them, their culture, their belief, their faith, etc. So obviously these are subversive values, and as per Cicero's design, neither Christianity nor Islam nor Judaism can be regarded as religion. As per Cicero's design, they were the superstitio, right? We have already discussed about it. And nevertheless, near 400, 500 AD, they started to Christianity started to adopt the notion that they are religion, and pagan practices are basically cults. So in ancient Roman tradition, whatever was religion started to be counted as cults and superstitions, and whatever was cult like Christianism was started to count as religion. So this subversion Christianity did very cunningly. So yeah, so basically that's why we are saying ki, okay, this cult, this as per this cult called Christianism, there is this state and there is this quote unquote religion as per them, which is Christianism. Now, Christianism is eternal, quote unquote, religion, and the state, which is ruling the earthly people, right? Um, Dealing with earthly matters, they are secular state, which means they are temporal state. So they change with time, but Christianism doesn't change with time because it is, in their word, it is eternal, it is Sanatan, right? While the state is secular, it is temporal. Secular literally means temporal. Okay, so this state is going to change, but eventually this state, because the state is imperfect, right? Because it is constituted of people and their belief, which are basically belief of the sinners, right? But eventually everyone will be converted to Christianity. The original sin will be sort of, people will be exonerated from their original sin. So this secular state will gradually become, will attain this eternal kingdom of heaven before the second coming of Jesus. So this is why they are calling the state secular, something which is separated from the religion because it is not eternal. Why did they do this sort of distinction between state and religion? So that the religion or the Christianism, this cult, stay above, right, and beyond the reach of the state, so that the state cannot touch these superstitions, the whatever the genocidal instincts, the malpractices, right, of this death cult, right, just to protect it from the argument of common people. They put the religion above the state and beyond the reach of the state. So this is what secularism actually is in the context of Europe. Now, this, as we have discussed, Christianism as a cult has also this weird chameleon-like adaptability, right? So the chameleon adaptability of the Christian ideological yearning towards spiritual and psychological enslavement of the other, manifested in the post-enlightenment world as secularism, in the word of J.S.I. Deepak. Ki, obviously, it changes as per requirement. So obviously, Christianism in India will look fundamentally different than the Christianism in Europe. But it is only because like they are adaptable only because they want to conquer as per the structure of a given society, right? Because they want to enslave the society, and that's why they change their form, right? It is just like what do you call it, Marich, the Mayam river, right? कि अलग अलग रूप पकड़ लेता है. So obviously the in order to enslave our society, they this Christianism adopted the root, the structure of secularism. Okay. Now, after obviously prolonged plunder and Janavidhwans of the colonized lands, Christianism invented the most cunning strategy to sever indigenous traditions from seamless continuity of life with nature and simultaneously put their death cult beyond the reach of the state formed by the colonized after transfer of power, right? So obviously in the medieval period they did huge amount of Janavidhwans, slayed down a lot of people, right? Conquered their land. Then obviously this settlement colonialism, then other form of colonialism like implemented in India. So after all this was complete, after they conquered a huge amount of land, they wanted to rule over the mind of these people, the very native people that they conquered. Okay, so obviously we were being told that Bharat was a synthetic product of colonization, which had no identity or consciousness of its own before the European colonizer set foot on its soil and stitched it together as one nation. So this is the common narrative that we know, right? Arguments that were allegedly rooted in the constitution were being marshaled to support these positions, which effectively turned the constitution into a battleground of sorts. The extent of the divide was such that we were told on social media that the use of Bharat for India was bigoted and against the constitution's promise of secularism. But like, how did we come here? We come here because all the people, right, all the so-called educated class of the country, even the highly educated university going and people, students and the professors, they are adopting that the notion of secularism is a universal notion, कि इसके अलावा और कुछ तो हो ही नहीं सकता, as if like this is a universal design. It has to be there in order to sort of cater to the interest of all the people dwelling in this country, right? But you have to know that this is a design by the colonizer, and colonizer thought about this design for over a century, and it stemmed from the Christian European vision for civilizing the rest of the world, right? And their pretension that secularism is a universal value, and consciously. So this also meant that the colonized societies that stood up against the edifice of the colonizer were no more alive. So it was a design. Secularism was a design that was imposed upon the native society by the colonizer after a huge battle by the natives. So obviously, when these sort of designs were being imposed on our society sort of kicked back, right? I mean, they did not readily accept these values. They actually fought for the retention of their own values, which mean that this is not a native value, first of all, right? And we need to know the whole struggle that was going on while sort of before adopting these sort of quote unquote pseudo universal values, and because it was imposed by the colonizer, we have to take it with a grain of salt, because whatever they imposed on us are mostly malevolent, right? So that's why we need to sort of judge it, and we have to understand कि इसमें मतलब what are the khai in the argument, right? So yeah, um, now a major criterion that was used to define toleration. So basically, what is the basis of secularism? The basis of secularism is tolerance. कि whatever is not your value, or in the European context, it was whatever is not Christian, we have to tolerate those values for a while, right? For the stability of the society. So in our context, in the context of India, ki whatever is not, let's say, our value, whatever is not Hindu value, for example, we have to show a certain amount of tolerance towards those values. This is the basis of secularism, right? Ki, so that we have to, as an individual, we have to show the toleration, and then the state will take care. State is promising, so I am showing tolerance, and contractually the state is promising me कि he will treat me and the person of the other value, let's say a Muslim or a Christian, in equal regard, right? The state is not going to perform any injustice on me, right? So this is the hidden contract behind secularism. Now, a major criterion that was used to define toleration of non-Christian values comes in the packaged form of delimitation of state coercion from individual freedom, right? Ki obviously the state is saying me ki you are an individual, you have some amount of freedom, and obviously there is a limited amount of coercion by the state, but through that coercion I am not going to snatch away all the freedom that you have. This is the hypothesis that says that only practices that do not cause harm to the others ought to be tolerated, right? Ki if there is a practice in Muslim society which is not harming me, I need to tolerate it. This is called the harm principle. The harm principle is this is actually the harm principle, the harm hypothesis, which was introduced by John Stuart Mill on his book in his book On Liberty in 1859, where John Stuart Mill is actually writing, quote, the only part of the conduct of anyone for which he is amenable to society is that which concerns others. In the part which merely concerns itself, his independence is of right absolute. Over himself, over his own body and mind, individually sovereign. Okay, so basically these actually formalized to prevent the secular state from imposing sensible, logical, natural, or secular restrictions on Christians, right? So why I'm saying this? Because here you're seeing this is the harm principle is basically saying what? Ki, the only part of the conduct of anyone for which he is amenable to society is that which concerns others. So I have my own freedom and I have certain conduct which are sort of parlocating in the society in some form. Some of my actions, some of my belief through which I am trying to put an impact on the society. I'm trying to work back on the society, right? So these sort of my beliefs, my actions, my faith, these are something that should concern others. Now, in part which merely concerns itself, right? But there is a huge part which actually concerns me only, and there I should be independent, and I should have absolute right over those things, right? So, such as owning my own body, my own mind, right? And in my own body and my mind, at least I should be sovereign, right? So from here it seems like okay, this is justified, but this was actually formalized. If you think deeply, it was formalized to prevent the secular state. Again, what is secular state? A state which is not favoring the Christianity. So it is. So I'm now talking in the context of Europe. It was actually formalized to prevent the secular state from imposing sensible, logical, natural, or secular restrictions on the Christians. Christianity as a faith, it is unscientific. It is not logical. It is actually nonsensical. It is not natural, and it is not secular. Now, when you are saying कि ठीक है मेरा belief है, whatever I believe, no matter how much illogical that is, I am sovereign. The state should not come to teach me that I am wrong in my Christian faith. So this way, when you are constructing the harm principle, you are guarding your blind faith of this death cult from the sensible, logical, natural, and secular imposition or dialogue that the state want to have with you. Okay, and their cult activities. So this was formalized to prevent the secular state from imposing sensible, logical, natural, and secular restrictions and dialogue with the Christians, and their cult activities, no matter how much unscientific, abnormal, and perversive they could be. it was also intended to curb the limit of the control of a society over the individual, राइट. कि सोसाइटी अगर कोई लॉजिकल डायरेक्शन पे जा रहा है, उससे एक क्रिश्चियन बंदे को कैसे रोका जाए, उससे रोकने के लिए भी अगर कोई बंदा अगर परवर्जन भी फैला रहा है, वो उस एक्टिविटी को कैसे इंसुलेट किया जाए, इसके लिए ये जो जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल है, इसने ये ऑन लिबर्टी में ये हार्म प्रिंसिपल प्रपोज किया. Now, one may argue that this principle was utilized to save democratic society from the tyranny of the majority, right? Ki, obviously, when you are saying that the individual is the sovereign, then the individual will have his own individual belief, and this way, the herd mentality would not take the dominant position, and the democratic society will be saved from the tyranny of the majority, right? But the reality is other way around. It is because the secular state could not dissuade these false, unscientific cults that the Abrahamics could find a safe space beyond the reach of the secular, democratic state to establish the tyranny of Abrahamic majority in Europe, right? Because the secular state cannot dissuade anymore. The secular state is not being able to have a dialogue with this irrational Christian man, this false unscientific cult, that the Abrahamics could find a safe space, right? So there are a lot of people, these Christian people, with whom the state cannot have a dialogue about Christianism and its irrationality. Now, these insulated Abrahamic majority cultish people, they can connect with each other, and they can, within the secular democratic state, to establish the tyranny of the Abrahamic majority in Europe, right? So it seems like you are trying to form a sovereign individual, but actually, what you are trying here is like you are safeguarding the Christian cult from the reach of the secular state. You are insulating these whole herd of sheeps, and then these guys can actually group up, just like what is happening in America, right? US, you can see there are different shows like Stephen Colbert, huh? You can see Seth Meyers and all these shows. These guys are super liberal. But please give the comment. But let me complete this, and then I will read this one. So Seth Meyers and other shows where these guys are super liberal. But then when the Charlie Kirk thing happened, since then they are not talking about they don't want to attack Christianity. So it is the absolutely liberal class who are making fun of Donald Trump, right, for the values that he is trying to impose upon the society. But the values are stemming from this death cult called Christianism. But these super liberal people who are doing daily show every night, they don't want to address the main issue, which is Christianism. This is how this harm principle, because the society is founded upon harm principle, and this harm principle is preventing, insulating this whatever white nationalist, which mean the white Christian nationalist, American nationalist, from being put at the obviously at the um, uh, I mean, having an argument, so putting at a position where the state and the comedians and all these people can have an argument with these people on Christianity, right? So this is what is the this is the paradox here that I'm trying to address. Yeah. So you can show me the comment here.
Yeah. So
Basically,
this was
rights exist till it does not infringe on others, or you can move your hand till it does not touch someone else's nose. Yes, so that is the harm principle, right? But here the harm principle is actually calling ki individual is sovereign. You cannot argue with them over their belief. This way you are protecting these blind faiths, no? That's the point. I mean, Hinduism, we are like, okay, you come to me, you want to argue with me, I want to argue, I can argue with you over my belief. I don't need that insulation. If you want to penetrate into my head and try to understand what is my religious whatever belief, I can argue with you. I'm not afraid of the fact that this is written in my scripture, and whatever is written in my scripture is approved by the constitution. Hence, I don't want to. We don't have that temperament. But these Abrahamics, they have that temperament, and the root. evil, the root hypothesis behind it, right, is this harm principle. They needed this harm principle in order to declare an individual as a sovereign who cannot argue, who the state has no right to argue with an individual over his or her belief. Right. Now, also, how can one know whether any of his actions harm others? Right. So this is a definite question कि you are saying कि अच्छा मतलब वही नोज वाला आर्ग्यूमेंट कि मेरा हाथ अगर आगे जा रहा है, जब तक तुम्हारा आगे नोज नहीं आ जाता तब तक मेरा एरिया ऑफ वट एवर प्रोपोगेशन है. बट देन हाउ कैन वन नो where exactly is that limit? How can one know whether any of his actions harm others? This glitch in the principle was taken advantage of by the Abrahamic cults to drown Bharat into a thermal bath of exclusivism, secularism, and constitutionalism that distanced itself from the civilizational continuum of Bharat, refused to acknowledge the existence of native society, its rules, customs, and structures, break it further to expose every native Hindu individual out in the open, prone to conversion. यहाँ पे ये लोग आर्ग्यू लाते हैं कि हार्मिंग प्रोबेबली मीन्स द फिजिकल हार्म. But you see, we are having there is a Supreme Court which is giving some top-down instruction of how a state should run. We are not physically harming you. You are not coming to get your life, right? So because there is no physical harm, so we can sort of continue this way of argument. We can sort of push the top down agenda through judiciary and court and legislation and whatnot, right? So and obviously they are as a reference they are saying ki, "Arey, in the last whatever 1,000 years you have gone through this much destruction and all, but let's forget it because there is no physical harm that is going on right now," right? Abrahamism thus subverted the natural evolution of native societies that happened for thousands and thousands of years to their own benefit without using any physical weapon or without physically killing any individual. At least most of the time, when they did, they managed to whitewash the event in the last century. So basically, they are arguing कि we are not causing you physical harm, but they are not ready to listen कि अरे मेरा जो tradition है that is also not physically harming anyone ना. So okay, there are two traditions, but then why are you not listening to me? Then they will bring the argument कि अरे you are barbars, your religious and social practices are actually barbaric. You believe in animal sacrifice, which is barbaric. You used to believe in whatever sati. Hence, the Hinduism should be discarded wholesale. You have this and that, and you have so much division in your society, as if division doesn't exist in any other society for that matter, right? So just by changing the conditions of life, society, nation, and constitution, stripping a man of his social surrounding and elevating the status of their cults much above and beyond the reach of the native state and its constitution, then altering the very state to run top down Abrahamic agenda to favor Abrahamism and convert the natives and their culture into Abrahamic folds directly and indirectly, has been the greatest victory of Abrahamic narratives since the inception of these death cults. तो जब अब्राहमिज्म जब चालू हुए थे उसके बाद उन्होंने काफी तबाही मचाया, राइट? दे हैव perpetrated so many sort of jana vidwans. They have destroyed so many civilizations. But now what they are achieving now in countries like India, it is actually smooth, and it is actually much more destructive than the physical destruction, for example, that Islam has incurred in India. Okay, so because this sort of I mean through this doctrination, right, like secularism, it is stripping a man of his social surrounding. राइट? यहाँ पे क्या होता है, इंडिया में एक सोसाइटी था, उसके अंदर एक इंसान बैठा हुआ था. सो देयर इज अ मैन एंड देयर इज अ सोसाइटी सराउंडिंग हिम. He needed to perform certain duties, otherwise the society would judge him back and sort of try to communicate with him, tell him what is right and wrong. यहाँ पे ये स्टेट आगे क्या कर रहा है, दिस सेक्युलर स्टेट, इट इज स्ट्रिपिंग, क्योंकि इट इज अगेन सेइंग कि एन इंडिविजुअल इज सोवरेन. इट इज स्ट्रिपिंग ऑफ this man, this individual, of his surrounding society, right? and then it is elevating the status of the Abrahamic cults much above and beyond the reach of the native state. तो यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है, अगर आर्ग्यू करना है तो हिंदू बिलीफ को लेके आर्ग्यू कर सकते हो, बट क्रिश्चियनिज्म और इस्लाम को लेके आर्ग्यू नहीं कर सकते. इनफैक्ट उनके राइट्स एंड उनका इंस्टीट्यूशंस, उनका प्रोपोगेशन सब कुछ प्रोटेक्टेड बाय द इंडियन स्टेट, राइट. सो ऑब्वियसली अ पर्सन, राइट, इज सेइंग कि अरे ये अपना जो सोसाइटी हो तो काफी इनसिक्योर है, इस पे रहने के लिए हमेशा मुझे जवाब देना पड़ रहा है. लेकिन मैं अगर उस सोसाइटी में चला जाऊंगा, आई एम नॉट आंसरेबल एनीमोर. माय फेथ, माय एक्शन, नथिंग इज आंसरेबल. अगर मैं कल अरशद मदनी बन जाऊं और मैं जिहाद का ओपन एक कॉल दे दूं, दैट इज ऑल्सो नॉट आंसरेबल टू, दैट गाय इज नॉट आंसरेबल टू द स्टेट. उसने जिहाद का कॉल दिया कल, द स्टेट कैन नॉट आस्क कि भाई जिहाद का कॉल तो ये वायलेंट कॉल है. नो, बिकॉज द स्टेट वुड नॉट इंटरफेयर इन रिलीजन, एंड जिहाद इज अ रिलीजियस प्रैक्टिस, राइट. ये जो एनोमेली है, इसका फायदा अब्राहमिज्म उठा रहा है, राइट. एंड दिस इज द ग्रेटेस्ट विक्ट्री ऑफ अब्राहमिक नैरेटिव्स इन नेटिव लाइक हिंदू कंट्रीज लाइक इंडिया, कि इस कंट्री में, बिकॉज वी बिलीव इन आर्ग्यूमेंट एंड ऑल दीज थिंग्स, अब्राहमिज्म डोंट बिलीव इन दिस, बट देन दे आर बियॉन्ड द रीच ऑफ द स्टेट. सो दिस इज देयर ग्रेटेस्ट विक्ट्री. वो लोग ऊपर बैठे हैं, फिर इंडियन स्टेट बैठा हुआ है, फिर एक हिंदू बैठा हुआ है. So it is the Abrahamic doctrine that is running the state, and also the each and every individual in this country, right? So Indian diversity is basically Hindu diversity, which is nothing but a cosmic explosion of human spontaneity in spite of thousands of years of brutal persecution, assault, slavery, and genocide, Janavidhwans of native population, right? But it is our diversity that has been weaponized against us. क्योंकि the secular state want a homogenizing state. Secular state has a dream कि everything will converge towards this secularism. They will sort of, if anything comes in the way of this secular aspiration, it is only Hindus who need to discard all these wings of diversity, right? Because it is not welcome, no matter how they say ki, it will keep it will treat all the religion in a similar way, but they don't define, they don't consider Hinduism as a religion, right? In constitution Hinduism, neither secularism nor Hinduism is defined. So they can just at their whim they can say whatever about Hinduism. And if there is any diversity, any belief and reciprocal belief living together, and together constituting a non-dualism of belief, right? So Hinduism believes in Advaita, right? Advaita has both sides, right, which can be reciprocal to each other, and both can simultaneously, at least in the earthly domain, thought and its reciprocal thought can simultaneously exist together, as long as they together belong to this beautiful tree of Advaita. But secularism don't believe in Advaita. Secularism is not Advaitism, right? It is not non-dualism. Secularism is something which is keeping these cults and irrational things beyond the reach of the state. So it cannot be non-dualism. It has a preferential treatment. So it is not Advaita belief, and hence the Hindu diversity is actually comes in the way of establishing secularism in this country, right? And obviously, when we are putting importance on the idea of secularism, one would expect its content to be more or less clear. However, whenever Indian intellectual attempt to pinpoint what secularism is, they end up in obscurity and confusion. In the 1970s, for example, one author made the remark like, for the last 2 decades since 1947 or 1950, Indians have been talking about secularism, yet the term remained vague and ambiguous. So, obviously, in 1950, secularism was not adopted in the constitution, but they were talking about the essence of the constitution as if it is a secular constitution. But then secularism was being discussed as, but I mean, no one had an idea how to define secularism in the Indian context. Okay. 20 years later, another author articulated a similar concern. Such a commonplace concept, such as secularism, with which the man in the street is so familiar and so used to, tend to acquire the character of a riddle, a puzzle, an enigma among intelligentsia. कि ये बोल रहे कि जो सड़कों पे चल चल रहा है एक हिंदू नेशन में, मतलब इंडिया में, उसको सेकुलरिज्म पता है, बट हम लोग जो इंटेलिजेंसिया है, हमको सेकुलरिज्म को डिफाइन करने में तकलीफ हो रहा है. ऑब्वियसली तकलीफ होगा, राइट? बिकॉज if you want to really do it in a neutral manner, it is not possible. It is secularism in secularism as a concept is applicable in a homogeneous society like a Christian society, जहाँ पे सब लोग क्रिश्चियन हैं, जहाँ पे सारे लोग अब्राहमाइज नहीं है, वहां पे तुम सेकुलरिज्म अप्लाई नहीं कर सकते. ठीक है? बिकॉज अगेन द मोमेंट यू आर सेपरेटिंग रिलीजन एंड स्टेट एंड गिविंग प्रेफरेंस, मतलब कीपिंग द रिलीजन अबव द स्टेट, वो तो उसमें तो आम जनता जो सड़कों पे चल रहा है वो तो यकीन नहीं करता. अभी भी इंडिया का आम जनता इस पे यकीन नहीं करता कि रिलीजन को स्टेट, मतलब उनको पूछो कि मतलब हिंदुओं को एटलीस्ट पूछो कौन पहले है, तुम्हारा देश मतलब भारत है या हिंदू धर्म पहले है, काफी टाइम आंसर आता है कि भारत पहले है, पहले भारत है उसके बाद मेरा हिंदू धर्म है. ये आंसर आता है एंड इट इज जस्टिफाइड आंसर बिकॉज इट इज अ नेटिव सिविलाइजेशनल सोसाइटी. और उन्हें पता है इस ये जब तक ये मिट्टी है, जब तक इस मिट्टी में उसका कल्चर है, उसका जो प्रकृति है उस तरह से फल फल फूल रहा है, तो नो मैटर अगर दो तीन बुक गायब भी हो गया, हम लोग फिर से ये गढ़ लेंगे. एटलीस्ट दिस इज व्हाट आवर बिलीवर, कि हमारा जो प्रकृति है, हमारा जो कंट्री है, दैट इज आवर रिलीजन, दैट इज आवर धर्म. वहां से हम लोग धर्म को निचोड़ सकते हैं. अगर दो तीन बुक गायब भी हो गया, जल भी गया, तो फर्क नहीं पड़ता. But this is antithetical to the Abrahamic belief and the Abrahamic concept of secularism, for that matter. So, as an intelligentsia, obviously that means कि you are an intelligentsia from with an Western lens. तुम जब वेस्टर्न लेंस वाला एक इंटेलिजेंसिया बनोगे, वहां से जब सेकुलरिज्म को डिफाइन करने की कोशिश करोगे, you will fail big time. No wonder, right? Okay, so some point out that the curious absence and the startling significant vacuity in the notion secularism itself, and go as far as to claim that the notion has become sort of a mantra, quasi-religious incantation. Others put it mildly and say there is a tendency among Indian intellectuals to interpret the concept of their own subjective manner, or they use more pointed terms like liberal Hindu gods who can take different forms and give a chance to the devotees to worship in any form they like. In India, the concept of secularism has acquired so many interpretations and it now means different things to different groups of people. राइट? हमारे हिसाब से सेकुलरिज्म डाइवर्सिटी है हमारा, कि अलग अलग जो विविधता है वो एक साथ रह सकता है. हिंदू के मन में ये सेकुलरिज्म है, राइट? ये और ये ऑब्वियस है. बट मुस्लिम के लिए ये नहीं है. मुस्लिम के लिए सेकुलरिज्म क्या है कि जितना हक हिंदू का है उतना हक हमें चाहिए, और उसके ऊपर से हमें वकफ भी चाहिए, हमें आर्टिकल 25 to 30 भी चाहिए. सो ऑब्वियसली अलग फैक्शंस के बीच ये टर्म का मीनिंग ही अलग रहता है, राइट? लेकिन इसमें ऑब्वियसली फायदा किसको होता है? फायदा उसको होता है जो राइट के लिए बात करता है, बिकॉज it is only the aggressive community that talks about right? It is only the aggressive community that go to the court asking for right. हिंदू को लगता नहीं है कि अरे ये तो हिंदू को, हिंदू एक ड्यूटी बेस्ड सोसाइटी है, तो वो पहले अपना जो फॉल्ट है वो ढूंढता रहता है. इतने में एक इस्लामिक बंदा आगे निकल जाता है, कोर्ट के पास जाता है और उसे उसका हक देना पड़ता है, जो हक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में लिखा है और जो हक बेसिकली जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन फेवर कर रहा है इन अब्राहमिक को. ठीक है? सो राइट, द सिचुएशन इज नो डिफरेंट इन द कोर्ट्स. Confusions about the term secularism surfaced in 1994 Supreme Court Bomai judgment, where 7 judges explained their views on secularism, each giving a different account. जो बोमाई वाला एक जजमेंट अभी भी साइट किया जाता है, उसमें एक जज ने ये बोला था कि द टर्म सेक्युलर हैज एडवाइजली नॉट बीन डिफाइंड प्रिजमबली because it is a very elastic term, not capable of precise definition, and perhaps left best undefined. कि ये एक इलास्टिक टर्म है, इसमें बहुत कुछ चीजें आ जाता है, सो इसको डिफाइन ही ना करे, इसको ऐसे ही इलास्टिक रहने देते हैं इसको डिफाइन करने की जरूरत नहीं है. Yes.
Bijit, I think that itself is incorrect because if you see the laws in France specifically, which is
Laicite.
in yeah, like it. So correct, they have defined secularism to the T.
Right.
They had correct. So how our learned judges can say, like, because they quote correct, they quote each other's the European countries constitutions are as Christian in nature as us is correct, and these are quoted correct when these kind of constitution things come up. So how our
Right.
learned judges did not know that the French Constitution is a truly classical secular constitution where they have defined the secular principles and the religious principles and the separation which has been done completely.
Now, I mean, to answer this question, I have to get into the mind of these judges and the whole, like, the people who were there in the structure, right?
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, the answer is obvious. And it is that ki France was a homogenized society. It was
Hmm.
largely a Christian society, and then
Hmm.
people started to see ki yaar, this church, it has been exploiting us big time. तो ये लोग जो कर रहे हैं इनको करने दो, उनको उनका चर्च अलग करो.
I'll
चर्च
add one
चर्च
more thing. I'll add one more thing to yeah so that I can answer it combined. So correct. So the word secularism and that is the byproduct of the church operation, which not sure not sure too many people are talking about it or not enough being talked about.
Mhm.
The word, the concept of secularism has to be invented because church was too oppressive in its
Right,
conduct. Correct.
right,
So why? But we still are a non-Christian majority country.
right,
So why impose the sins of others on Hindus?
right, exactly,
And these questions are not being asked.
right,
Nobody's asking it. Like I am, for me, it's very common sense. It comes to me automatically as a spontaneous thought in mind because I am listening and reading things. But people who are intellectuals, who are supposed to ask these questions, nobody's asking for it. No, nobody's asking these questions.
right. And the other thing is, you could have just added the word nirapeksh. You could have just
Hmm.
add nirapeksh,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, because see, as we say, ki many Sanskrit words. I mean, Sanskrit as a language, it is a creation of God, right? And when we say this, when we claim this, it has a basis. What is the basis? Because in Sanskrit, it is such a precise language because the words are coming from the mainly the dhatu and pratyay and all these things, right? So each and every word is defined in a very specific way. Unlike other languages, because most of the languages are derivative of and apobhramsha of Sanskrit,
Ex-
right? So they don't know the origin of their word. We exactly know the origin of our words. So basically by default, each and every word that is there in Sanskrit and many Indian languages, we know precisely what they mean, right? I mean, many of the words that are there in Oxford Dictionary or French dictionary, those are borrowed words because this dictionary they change in time, right? And they don't know where they are originated from. That's why they need to maintain a dictionary, so to say, because
and just one more thing to add to the argument itself. So correct, we hear the term correct Western civilization, correct,
right,
and we have talked about this multiple fold in our series, that Western civilization is equated with with Christian civilization, but the Christian civilization traces its roots to Roman and Greco-Roman
right,
civilization.
right.
But
So,
this what I would say, it's a hypocrisy of the intellectuals of the Western people themselves, that they are not calling out that okay, the classical Greco-Roman civilization was
Right.
not a Christian civilization.
Exactly.
I'm not sure
They are
how many
borrowing the
people.
words. They are borrowing their words from there.
Hmm,
Pretty much all the words that you use in English have the Greco-Roman origin.
hmm.
So they are borrowing even from that Greco-Roman tradition without giving attribution. And because they are not giving a proper attribution to those origins, no wonder it is creating such like puzzles, right? Um, and a word can mean very many things, as we have already discussed yesterday. The very word Christian slavery meant a lot of things. It opened up a whole new sort of slew of meanings, right? And but that's the problem when you are using a word. Just like they copied a lot of things from across the world in terms of science, right? In arts, because arts is a as a subject, it's a very subtle subject, right? Such as
It is it
matlab,
is fluid in nature. It is fluid.
etymology and all these things, yeah. And they have, so to say, they did not have any basis of etymology or linguistic. They just created these words and all these things out of thin air, by borrowing and all these things, right? By apobhramsho,
Hmm.
which means the derangement and depredation of a word and subversion of any sound. All these things that has gone into creating English words. So when you don't know the
Uh,
origin of your words, obviously you are bound to make mistakes. And then from those uh, dictionaries which are actually erroneous, we have copied those words into our constitution without thinking deeply कि यार ये लाने से actually it can create a lot of problem. Now we are talking about elasticity of a word and all these things, but these are actual bullshit, right? What does it mean a word is elastic, right?
and one more thing. So, what do you think the giants of West, I would say Christian people, correct? Who actually who portray themselves as secular, okay, in public, and are they dishonest intellectuals who fail to call out that the Christian principles are 180-degree against the classical Roman philosophy and practices, including their own faiths.
Right. Right. As I said, I think we have already discussed it in one of the previous episodes that
Hmm,
what is called the Enlightenment and Renaissance period
hmm,
is actually uh, a Christian apologist period, where they have borrowed a lot of things and philosophy from philosophy, painting, style of art from the Greco-Roman pagan traditions without giving proper attributions. And in the process, for example, in philosophy, pretty much all the philosophers in that era were either copying from Hindu philosophy or they were creating Christian apologist philosophy. So, for example, I think we talked about this guy Rousseau, right? Rousseau is considered to be the father of Enlightenment in France, right? Whose writing apparently caused a huge French rebellion and French Revolution and all these things. But here is something that this guy is writing, and he's saying ki science we have to science can endanger society. Let me where is that thing? Uh, Wait a second. It's actually a very funny quote. I think I forwarded it to you, but
yeah. You did forward.
let me check. Yes. So here is this guy writing. So I'm copying from Leo Strauss, Natural Right and History. Okay. So yeah, therefore, so here is this guy Rousseau. Rousseau is writing, quote, therefore, science or the attempt to replace opinion by knowledge. So the attempt to replace opinion by knowledge necessarily endangered society. So you cannot have knowledge in society because it will endanger the society. You cannot have science in the society because it will endanger the society. Which society? Christian society. Okay? Freaking Christian society. Moreover, free society presupposes that its members have abandoned their original or natural freedom in favor of conventional freedom, that is, in favor of obedience to the laws of the community. Which community? Christian community. Or to inform rules of conduct to the making of which everyone can have contributed. Civil society requires conformity or the transformation of man as natural being into the citizen. But the philosopher, listen, but the philosopher or scientist must follow his own genius with an absolute sincerity or without any regard to the general will or the communal way of thinking. Finally, free society comes into being through the substitution of conventional equality for natural inequality. ठीक है. So basically this guy is saying कि because these guys philosophers and scientists they have their own genius and they don't conform to the general will of the society, right, and the uniform rules of conduct, incorporation of knowledge and science in the society can endanger a society. So this is what the Christian, this is what the modern, quote unquote, modern Renaissance enlightened philosophers are arguing in the construction of the society. Why? Because they're trying to construct a synthetic society by the imposition of an external morality, synthetic morality, scriptural false morality, as doctrinated in Christianism. That's why a philosopher need to argue in this real like bullshit way, to, in saying ki science will endanger a society or knowledge will endanger a society. Just imagine how insecure this so-called Western society is, that they need to denounce science and knowledge in order to maintain the stasis. I mean, I would call it stasis or the equilibrium in their society, right? So obviously, when you are borrowing any idea from that synthetic morality, synthetic scriptural morality, you will have no foundational basis of those things, right? Niropeksha is coming from a natural morality. It is easy to express, it is easy to understand. Secularism, because it is coming from a synthetic morality, which has no foundational basis, which is not a natural morality, it will obviously difficult to interpret, because the people who don't believe in natural morality will try to argue in their own scriptural way. And then you have this whole harm principle, which will say that individualism is sovereign and his faith is supreme. The state cannot ask him any question about his faith. So that's a puzzle, right? You cannot treat a rationality and irrationality with you cannot give them equal treatment, right? If something is synthetic morality and something is natural morality, you cannot treat them equally. You should not treat them equally as a state. But here, a state is actually not only treating the Abrahamism with like giving them a favor. Actually, it is keeping it beyond the reach of the state itself. तो वहां से फिर ये आएगा.
Yeah, Vijitda. So correct, we have discussed this. So this is maybe a appropriate time to share this specific book, Discovery and Bharat, Christian Constitution in a Hindu Nation. So he is a lawyer, Mr. M.R. Venkatesh. Probably he lives in South, and he has rewrote this book. This will be released shortly, where he actually talks about why we call Indian Constitution a Christian Constitution from a legal expert.
Right.
So that actually now it gets into the nitty-gritties of the legal framework and legal arguments. That if I and you say that Indian Constitution is a Christian constitution, people will not take us seriously. But
Right.
when a legal practitioner writes a book and gives his argument in a proper way, then it gets much more better credibility.
Sure. Yeah. And we're going to discuss in a while the different judgments and all these things in the coming 10-15 minutes. And it is going to
Vijit,
get even more interesting. Yes.
yeah, Vijit, so you continue. I need to take a break for 5-10 minutes. Okay, I need to
Sure,
get
sure.
some food. So you continue. I will be there in the back end.
Yep. Yep. Right. So, where were we? Huh. We were actually discussing the liberal secularism and how it is irrelevant in the context of and even dangerous to be incorporated in our own native code, I would say. Okay, so now we are going to discuss, we are going to put whatever we have discussed in the historical context. First we are going to discuss ki constituent assembly debate mein what they were arguing about that led to this sort of hodgepodge of constitution and the very word secularism, why it was kept without specific interpretation and definition, and then we are going to discuss various judgments which actually exposes the limitation of the constitution and judiciary when it comes to actually equating the word secularism with nirapekshata. Okay, how the judiciary and the constitution actually shy away to equate secularism with nirapekshata. We are going to establish it in the coming 10-15 minutes. Right. So, first, the Constituent Assembly debates, as I have promised. Right. So, the foundations of the Indian secular state are located in the debates of Constituent Assembly, the body that drafted the Constitution of India between 1946 and 1949. Since most assembly members agreed that India should become a secular democracy, they reproduced standard formulations of religious freedom and the secular state. So this much is easier, right? कि ठीक है, अगर religious कोई practice है उस पे हम लोग बाधा नहीं डालेंगे, because these are outward expression of a philosophy, or अगर outward expression of a philosophy, if it is not harming anyone, then it should be fine, right? At least मतलब अगर बाहर से जो दिखा रहे हैं उसके थ्रू अगर भाईचारा निकल रहा है तो वी शुड बी फाइन विद इट, बाद में फिलोसफी को टैकल कर लेंगे. But anyway, yet the trouble in interpreting these surfaced whenever there was a disagreement about their implications. जब फिलोसफी डिस्कस करने लगे, थोड़ा गहराई में घुसने लगे, तब प्रॉब्लम आना चालू हुआ. एंड द फर्स्ट प्रॉब्लम वाज अबाउट द यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड, obviously, right? So this started when Muhammad Ismail, a Muslim representative, proposed to add the following proviso to Article 35, which said that the state would secure for its citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India, provided that any group, section, or community of people shall not be obliged to give up its own personal law in case it has such a law. जब यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड का बात होने लगा तब मोहम्मद इस्माइल, अपना एक पीसफुल बंदा, ही एक्चुअली सेड कि इट शुड नॉट कॉन्ट्राडिक्ट विद द पर्सनल लॉ. अगर कोई पर्सनल लॉ है तो वहां पे फिर उस ग्रुप को अप्लाइज नहीं किया जाएगा टू ओबे द यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड. Ismail defended his provision as follows, quote, now the right to follow personal law is part of the way of life of those people who are following such laws. It is part of their religion and part of their culture. If anything is done affecting the personal laws, it will be tantamount to interference with the way of life of those people who have been observing these laws for generations and ages. The secular state which we are trying to create should not do anything to interfere with the way of life and the religion of the people. And there is no depth in this argument, so I'm not going to even explain it further. Several Muslim representatives agreed that the secular state could not touch personal law because it ought not to interfere in matters of religion. Now, when others rejected this proviso as a direct negation of Article 35, the dispute turned into correct interpretation of the secular state. Another representative insisted that Indians seem to have very strange ideas about the secular state. Quote, people seem to think that under a secular state, there must be a common law observed by its citizen in all matters, including matters of their daily life, their language, their culture, their personal laws. This is incorrect, he added, because in a secular state, quote, citizens belonging to different communities must have the freedom to practice their own religion, observe their own life, and their personal laws should be applied to them. At the time of this debate, the idea that the same set of laws and rights should apply to all citizens irrespective of religious affiliations, was not a very strange idea, but a central principle of the liberal secular state. If the state ought not to interfere with the ways of life of people, then legal uniformity would become impossible. Indeed, such reasoning led Muslim representatives to rejecting the attempt to have uniformity of law to be imposed upon the whole people concerning civil matters as a tyranny provision which ought not to be tolerated. In response, K. Munshi remarked that democracies in the West had uniformity of law and were hardly tyrannies. Right? So Muslims are arguing that imposition of uniform civil code is a tyranny upon Muslims, but K. Munshi is saying ki the West has been having democracies and secular democracies in pretty much all nations, and there are hardly any tyrannies. Munshi also denied that personal law was part of religion. Expectedly, this dispute now took the form of disagreement about the scope of the term religion. Munshi argued that religion should be restricted to spheres that legitimately appertain to it, while the rest of life can be regulated by law. The state was welcome to interfere in secular affairs of any religion, but as Ismail retorted, each community also disagreed on what was religious and secular, obviously, right? It is a question of difference of opinion as to what a religion should do or should not. People differ, and people holding different views on this matter must tolerate the other view. So here basically the dispute is saying ki, ki a so K. Munshi is arguing ki obviously if there is a religion and religious practices, it can be dissected and it can be categorized into, let's say, essentially religious practice surrounded by some secular practices, right? And then Munshi is driving his argument towards the point where where sort of the debate is asking about defining the essential religious practice of a religion, if you can call Islam or Christianity a religion at all. Okay, but the Muslims are saying, we are not going to listen to you about what should be considered essential religious practice and what should be considered secular practice. To us, to Muslims, everything that we observe within our religion should be considered as religious practice. Now, in this debate, the Muslim representatives treated the principle that the state ought not to interfere in religion as an isolated normative proposition and made use of a commonplace from Islamic theology to interpret it. The belief that Sharia has been ordained by Allah and not by human agency. Now you see, when there is a debate between uniform civil code and like when the Constituent Assembly is trying to come up with establishing the equivalence between secularism and nirapekshata, here an Abrahamic power have started to invoke Allah. They are saying ki we have Allah who is Almighty, and Allah should be treated above the state. Hence, whatever Allah has ordained through Sharia, the Indian state cannot touch on any of those principles. So now, when you try to construct secularism by giving space to such blind belief, obviously you are bound to commit like confusion and errors, right? Now, since religion covered all of God's revelation, they suggested a secular state should not interfere in Muslim personal law, which means that there will be a secular state, but the Muslim law will be beyond the reach of that state. Confronted by the interpretation, secularists in the assembly could not draw upon any conception of religion that clarified the properties determining the religiousness of a practice or belief. Right? Muslims are saying no matter what we practice and what are our belief, they are religious belief. You cannot call them secular. Or you cannot call them irrational for that matter. They had to take recourse to other commonplace to interpret this principle. Now, B.R. Ambedkar comes here into the picture. B.R. Ambedkar is now trying to establish the idea of essential religious practice. That will lead to even more confusion. So, B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of constitution and advocate of social reform, borrowed the cliche from European Orientalists that religion in India cover all aspects of life from birth to death. There is nothing which is not religion. And if personal law is to be saved, just like the Muslims are arguing, um, I am sure. So Ambedkar is saying, I am sure about it that in social matters we will come to a standstill. If you try to incorporate personal law in this debate, then obviously the debate will halt here. It will come to a standstill, and we are not moving ahead. He offered an alternative to seeing everything as religion. Quote: "There is nothing extraordinary in saying that we ought to strive hereafter to limit the definition of religion in such a manner that we shall not extend beyond beliefs and such rituals as may be connected with ceremonials which are essentially religious." Ambedkar's proposal, however, generated a vicious cycle, since his definition of religion included the term to be defined. Without consensus on what religion itself is, there would also be disagreement on what was essentially religious, right? So now the debate will be about, okay, what is essentially religious and what is not. And then from there, there will be cases where, for example, controlling temple, right? So the state will start to argue that, okay, I know ki Hinduism is a religion and we have granted you the status ki you are religion, but management of temple is a secular affair. And management of temple, because it is a secular affair, the state can have control over it. The state can have control over the trustee and the boards, and even they can appoint a Muslim or a Christian to watch over the trustees and the board, temple board, right? Because controlling the temple or management of the temple is a secular affair, although rituals performed in the temple is essentially religious. Hence, the temple ritual would not come under the purview of the state, but the management of the temple can come under the purview and control of the state. So this is basically the argument that is still there, in the judicial sort of sphere, and they're using it, right? And recently, in the case in Kerala, right, the Sabrimala case, they started to consider even the temple ritual as a secular affair in which the state can intrude, right? So the basically the temperament of the Indian state, the Indian secular state, is that ki okay, you dissect the Hindu values into essential religious and secular values, and then you so when you try to sort of categorize something as essentially religious and then something which is so essentially religious and secular, then you try to widen the scope of the secular affairs in Hindu values to the extent that you try to penetrate into the garbhagriha of a temple, right? You try to steal the gold that is there in the door and in the murtis, in the vigrahas. You try to say ki the even the woman will have the access to Sabrimala, and the men can have access to Kamakhya Devi temple. You start to basically narrow down what is essential religious practice of Hinduism. That is where the Indian state is actually moving, right? In through the argument in the court and in legislation, right? Okay, so now judging Hinduism. So when the constitutional sort of constitutional assembly debate was sort of established, and it could not give a proper definition of secularism, it could not implement uniform civil code. But how now we are going to discuss how it affected the judgment, which actually are relevant for our purpose, right? For Hindus. Right. So the puzzle of the two spheres wreaks havoc in India because it is even less clear that the elsewhere how the religious and the secular are to be identified. The majority religion of India is supposed to be Hinduism, but there is no clarity as to what Hinduism actually is, whether it is a religion or not, or even whether it exists or not. Why? Because they don't care about the Cicero's definition of religion. What was considered to be called, they are now calling it as religion: Christianism, Islam, and Judaism. And what used to be considered as religion, as per the order of the state that connect it with the cosmic order, right? Born out of the native civilization. So those used to be called as religion. But here Hinduism have, because the Indian state is viewing everything from an Abrahamic, with an Abrahamic lens. Hinduism, matlab, which is as per Cicero's definition the actual religion, has become cult. And the cult, like Christianism and Islam and Judaism, they have become religion. Okay, so in 1946, our Nehru Chacha noted, quote, Hinduism as a faith is vague, amorphous, many-sided, all things to all men. It is hardly possible to define it, or indeed to say whether it is a religion or not, not in the usual, or not in the usual sense of the word. Right. Fine, I don't have any objection as long as you keep it, you acknowledge the diversity of it. It must be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to identify something that is indefinable, vague, amorphous, many-sided, and all things to all men. But when one does not succeed in identifying Hindu religion, how can one even dream of separating it from the state? But it is necessary, right, in order to bring the status of Hinduism down in the eyes of the state. You need to sort of somehow create a hodgepodge of religion and Hinduism, right? This constitutes a serious problem. Scholars agree there is no particular set of dogmas, belief, or practices that define Hindu religion. Basically, the conclusion is that the religion does not have any properties allowing one to recognize it. If Hinduism does not have such properties, how shall we determine when this religion intrudes into political domain? When does a state become Hindu as opposed to secular? When the government publicly cites Rama as the prototype of ethical king, or when it consults an astrologer before making a political decision, when a puja ritual is done in parliament, or when a Puranic story is told by state officials, any answer to such questions will derive from the properties that distinguish the class of things Hindu from that thing secular. Since there is no consensus on this, one can fix this standard as one chooses. Accordingly, one can give one's own interpretation as to what it means to for India to be a secular state. Now we come to a particular judgment. So perhaps the consequences are best illustrated when the Indian judiciary invokes a number of definitions of Hinduism and religion to interpret laws related to religion. In 1952, the Bombay High Court had to interpret the constitutional religious freedom articles in the case of Ratilal Panachand Gandhi versus the state of Bombay. So this is an important case where it so happened. So this was, I think, this was in 1952, I guess. It is in 1952. This is Ratilal Gandhi versus State of Bombay, where two petitioners challenged the constitutionality of certain provisions of some 1950 Bombay Public Trust Act. Okay, so this case challenged the validity of several provisions in the Bombay Public Trust Act 1950. Under this act, the state sought to regulate public and religious trust of temples, mosques, charitable and religious trusts, requiring registration, oversight, audits, and giving state appointed officials, such as charity commissioner, power over administration of such trust. So basically, the state wanted to capture the trust of some Jain temple. The petitioner, including the trustees of a Jain temple and trustees of Parsi Panchayat Fund, argued that certain provisions of the Act violated their constitutional rights under Article 25 and 26 of the Constitution of India, which guarantee freedom of religion and the right to religious denominations. Okay. The final judgment was on 18th of March 1954. The court struck down the some key provisions of Bombay Public Trust Act, notably those that allowed the state appointed charity commissioner to automatically become trustee of religious institutions. Okay, but here we are going to detail of this case. Now, so the two petitioners had challenged the constitutionality of certain provisions of the Bombay Public Trust Act of 1950, which allowed the state to regulate the administration of public religious and charitable trust. They argued that Jain temples, which also fell under the scope of this trust, could only be used for specific purposes according to the tenets of Jain religion. Therefore, the Bombay Act contravened the constitutional articles of religious freedom. right? So basically the Jains were arguing ki, hey, this is my religion, and the temple is part of my religion. So whatever the trust is there, it is part of my religion. You cannot intervene there. Okay. Now the judge pointed out that the religious freedom granted by Article 25 and 26 was restricted. Quote, it is not every aspect of religion that has been safeguarded, nor has the constitution provided that every religious activity can be interfered with. So drawing on a specific, so they are trying to say ki, temple trust is a secular affair. Drawing on, so here is court arguing ki, against the Jains, ki your Jain temple and the trust there, it's not part of your religion. Okay. So drawing on the specific etymology of the term religion, originally proposed by, okay, religion was originally proposed by someone else, but this religion, drawing on the specific etymology, the judge suggested that this term should be understood in its strict etymological sense as that which binds a man with his creator. Okay, so basically the court is arguing that, this is not, temple trust is not essential part of your religion, because religion is what binds a man to his creator, and that is the essential core of a religion. Those doctrines around this bonding between a man and creator, and temple trust doesn't come under the purview of this doctrine, hence it is a secular part of your belief, right? However, the petitioner's lawyer argued that Jains do not believe in any creator, and therefore the distinction could not apply to them. जैन बोल रहे कि हम लोग कोई क्रिएटर में यकीन नहीं करते, तो हम पे ये सब क्यों थोप रहे हो religion ka aisa definition. The judge responded then as follows, quote, but even where you have a religion which does not believe in a creator, every religion must believe in a conscience, and it must believe in ethical and moral precepts. Therefore, whatever binds a man to his own conscience and whatever moral and ethical principles regulate the lives of men, that alone can constitute religion as understood in the Constitution. A religion may have many secular activities, it may have secular aspects, but these secular activities and aspects do not constitute religion as understood by the Constitution. अब थोड़ा लाइन में आ रहा है, बट अगेन वो ये क्लेम कर रहा है कि इट्स योर कॉन्शियंस एंड हाउ यू कनेक्ट विथ योर कॉन्शियंस इज पार्ट ऑफ योर रिलीजन. मतलब थोड़ा बहुत सच बोल रहा है ठीक है फाइनली, कि ओके कोई गॉड सिटिंग इन हेवन, इसमें जैन लोग या कोई सनातनी बिलीव नहीं करता, बट तुम्हारा जो तुम्हारे कॉन्शियंस के साथ कनेक्शन है उतना ही तुम्हारा रिलीजन है. तुम्हारे टेम्पल और टेम्पल ट्रस्ट इसका हिस्सा नहीं है, वो तो सेकुलर पार्ट है. नाउ the point is, if religion is constituted by the conscience and its moral precepts, then one cannot consistently argue that it does not encompass activities such as administration of the temple, right? Otherwise one have to allow managing the finances of a temple, including potential embezzlement of its wealth and actions outside the domain of morality and the conscience, right? The point is, टेम्पल का फंड और टेम्पल का ट्रस्ट कैसे इसका हिस्सा नहीं हो सकता. मेरा रिलीजन अगर मुझे सिखाता है कि चोरी मत करो, और मेरा रिलीजन अगर मुझे ये सिखाता है कि टेम्पल में दिया हुआ जो पैसा है उसका उसका उसके साथ फ्रॉड मत करो, इट इज पार्ट ऑफ माई रिलीजन, but the court was not ready to accept that part, right? But this does not make sense. According to any follower of a religion or tradition, such actions do belong in that domain. Consequently, since this judge argued that religion is constituted by whatever binds a man to his own conscience and whatever moral and ethical principles regulate the lives of men, such secular activities would have to come under the realm of religion, right? Still, interpreting religion in the strict constitutional sense, um, uh, made the judge conclude that the administration of the property was not religious but a secular activity regulated by the state. Drawing on some definition of religion, the judge here determined for the followers of a tradition which aspects of that tradition were essentially religious and secular. In another similar case, the same court had stated that even the authority of a religious body in relation to its members had nothing to do with the religion, right? Matlab, just to save a falsehood that there is a guy sitting in the heaven above us, just to save that blind faith the court is going to the extent of uh, announcing that our core values, the core values of Sanatanis, of Jains, Sikh, Buddhist, and Hindus, are essentially secular values. Okay, our values are universal values, but then you are calling them secular values. ठीक है, और वहां से फिर अब्राहमिक के हाथों में हमारे टेम्पल ट्रस्ट और टेम्पल बोर्ड को सौंप रहे हो, राइट? दिस इज द जस्टिस, दिस इज हाउ दे आर subverting the word universalism to fit into the narrow definition or narrow what elasticity of secularism, and from there they are trying to frame an argument that can help the Abrahamics to take control of our temple board and temple trust, right? So obviously, then this got rejected, and the Supreme Court actually reinterpreted religion as it is not merely an opinion, doctrine, or belief, but had outward expression in acts as well. कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट बोल रहा है कि इट इज नॉट मियरली बिलीव, बट तुम जो एक्शन लेते हो, तुम टेम्पल का निर्माण करते हो, दैट इज ऑल्सो पार्ट ऑफ योर रिलीजन. सो दैट वाज द फ्रेम ऑफ आर्ग्यूमेंट फॉर देम, right? So this step shifts the problem to even difficult questions. Which are the religions of India? Is Hinduism one of them? Hinduism consists of a range of traditions, all of which prefer different narratives, draw on different teachers, and emphasize different texts and customs. Which of these contains the doctrine that determines the essential part of Hindu religion? Perhaps one could propose that there are many different Hindu religions. However, given the absence of fixed scriptures or doctrinal systems distinguishing these from each other, where will we find the doctrines about the essential part of these religions? Given the non existence of established authorities, who will decide about this doctrine? Right? Then these issues remain unresolved. Became clear in later cases where the court argued that demonstrating that some practice were truly Hindu required that one produce its scriptural foundation. तो बाद में कोर्ट फिर धीरे धीरे स्क्रिप्चरल मोरालिटी अपने जजमेंट में इंक्लूड करने लगा. So then the court started to argue कि to demonstrate something is a Hindu practice, you have to come up with some scriptural reference. The next step was inevitable. Judges claimed that certain practices that appeared to belong to some religion did not really constitute as essential and integral part of that religion. A community's claim could not always be accepted. अगर कोई community अगर लाख सालों से कोई practice को निभा रहा है, it will not accepted in court. Okay. Right. So certain practices that appeared to belong to certain religion did not really constitute an essential integral part of religion. A community's claim could not always be accepted, for the essentially religious might well be founded on superstition, ignorance, misunderstanding of the true teaching of Hindu religion. अब कोर्ट क्या डिसाइड करने लगा कि व्हाट आर द ट्रू टीचिंग ऑफ हिंदू रिलीजन. सो नाउ कोर्ट स्टार्टेड टू डिक्टेट व्हाट इज हिंदू रिलीजन एंड व्हाट इज नॉट, और उसके बेसिस पे फिर जो लोकल ट्रेडिशन है उसको फिर सुपरस्टिशन कहने लगा, उसको फिर इग्नोरेंस बोलने लगा, मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग कहने लगा. सो you see the dichotomy here. It is the court who is taking the role of a priest, even above the priest, to decide what is essential Hindu religion and what tradition is Hindu and what tradition is superstitious. But when it comes to Quran or Bible, the same court will not ask कि 9.5 is saying कि यार Quran 9.5 says what, कि कहीं पे छुप के रहो, घात लगा के बैठो, और जब मुश्रिक मिले उनको काट दो. राइट, दिस इज स्ले डाउन द मुश्रिक, दैट इज कुरान 9.5. या फिर कुरान 4.34, दैट इज एक्चुअली सेइंग सूरा अन-निसा. सूरा अन-निसा क्या कहता है कि इफ यू फियर डिसोबीडियंस फ्रॉम योर वाइव्स, you abuse them, you separate your bed, and उसके बाद भी नहीं माना, then you can beat your wife. The court will not ask these verses because these are part of essential religious practice, but the court will decide which part of our Hindu tradition is superstitious, which part is basically our ignorance and our misunderstanding of the true Hindu religion. So the court started to, it is the Indian judiciary that started to define what true Hindu religion is, right? As Ronojoy Sen shows in his work on religion in the Indian Supreme Court, Indian courts now took upon themselves the task of reforming Hinduism back to scriptural purity and discarding all quote unquote superstitious accretions added to its original core. Supreme Court started to decide the original core of Hinduism. To conclude, Indian judges have decided what religion is and what is secular and what is essentially religious about certain practices and what is truly religious as opposed to the superstitious. So पहले बोला कि okay, there are certain practices, some of them are secular practices, तो उसको हटा दो. फिर बोला कि some of them are superstition, वो हटा दो. And then जो core है, उस core को तुम define करने लगो. उस core को judiciary define करेगा what is essential Hinduism. At its most disquieting quietening hoga, this modus operandi takes the form of so-called doctrine of essential practice, which allows Supreme Court to reform religions and dispose of all non-essential practices according to a normative picture of rational religion. As many have noted, the criteria used to settle these issues are deeply flawed, even though they bestow upon Indian judges a religious authority. So now Indian judges are the religious authority who are sitting above any priest of Hindu religion. शंकराचार्य के ऊपर भी जो priest बैठा हुआ है वो Indian judiciary है when it comes to interpreting Hindu religion. Okay. At this point, we can come back to the confusion surrounding the idea of secularism, right? Now, obviously, anything that allows different kind of people to live together. So, basically, हमारे दिमाग में या फिर जो कॉमन नोशन है कि सारे लोग अपने अपने लोगों में प्रैक्टिस है और सब लोग एक साथ मिलजुल के रह रहे हैं एंड द वे दे सॉर्ट ऑफ इंटरेक्ट विद ईच अदर द होल डायनामिक्स that is emerging and that is evolving within the nation, at least in the nation of India, that is secularism, right? Now, the notion has become as vague as it possibly could. It is defined as a state of mind, almost. So, secularism is a state of mind as per some interpretation, almost an instinctive feeling such as existed by and large for many centuries in India, where Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, and followers of other faiths lived side by side in general harmony, or as a respect for differences cutting across class, caste, community, gender, in which religion is a component in the shaping of identity but not the determining criterion. Consequently, the discourse of liberal secularism prevents one from understanding the problem of pluralism in India instead of helping to solve them. The urgency of these problems today makes it all the more painful that some continue to believe that they can be resolved by endlessly repeating the mantra that the political should be separated from the religious, right? So obviously, here we have revealed a problem at the heart of the liberal model of secularism and the religious toleration, namely identifying of the sphere of religion and distinguishing it from the public political sphere. The fact leads to secularist and anti. So obviously, this idea of secularism, both its advocate and opponent acknowledge emerged in modern West. This fact leads secularist and anti-secularist in India to very different conclusions. The anti-secularist argue that secularism has become a sterile concept in India because of its alien origin. The secularists disagree. For example, Charles Taylor writes, the Christian origin of the idea are undeniable, but this does not have to mean that it has no application elsewhere. Mushirul Hassan agrees the central issue is not the Western provenance of an idea, but its place and relevance in a plural society. Right? तो बेसिकली अब आर्ग्यूमेंट क्या होने लगा है अब दे आर आर्ग्यूइंग कि ठीक है इट हैड अ क्रिश्चियन ओरिजिन बट इट डज नॉट मीन कि इट कैन नॉट बी यूनिवर्सलाइज्ड राइट बट हम लोग यहाँ पे देख रहे हैं कि एटलीस्ट इन द जुडिशियरी ये हिस्टोरिकली इस डिबेट को जुडिशियरी एटलीस्ट या फिर लेजिस्लेशन इसको सॉल्व नहीं कर पाया है ठीक है सो यहाँ पे एक छोटा सा ब्रेक लेते हैं now we are going to enter the philosophy. So थोड़ा क्वेश्चन ले लेते हैं फिर we will try to understand कि so अभी तो हिस्ट्री समझ में आया थोड़ा कि ये सॉल्व नहीं हुआ है. Now we are trying to pose the question in the coming few minutes कि can it be resolved at least in the near future or or do the state even have the intent to resolve and truly define, um, truly in the sense exactly define what secularism is, or whether it has any relevance in the context of India. Okay. So अगर भूपेंद्र है तो थोड़ा क्वेश्चन ले लेते हैं. आई एम टेकिंग अ क्विक ब्रेक, और फिर people can join and we can have a discussion on this. भूपेंद्र है क्या, या रुद्रो? ठीक ठीक ठीक, कोई नहीं है क्या? Okay, so then I can continue actually. Just let me drink some water. Okay, so now we are going to discuss the philosophy to sort of understand what is the future of it. Like कोई इंटेंट भी है क्या इस स्टेट का when it comes to defining secularism and actually save Hinduism from its demise, right, into this black hole named secularism. Okay, right. So first we need to, हाँ, भूपेंद्र आ गया.
Okay, I can't see myself. Am I there?
हाँ हाँ हाँ, we can see you.
I can't see myself. What's happening? Okay, let me just check. Now I'm back.
Okay, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah. So I think now we can invite people who want to come and discuss it because it's a
हाँ,
very
sure.
contentious topic. I'll also share my few things. Okay. So people who want to join, I think the link is already there in the community tab. So people, you can come and join and discuss. Yes, yes. So I think today will be a great discussion indeed. Uh, yeah. So now a few things from my end before people come and join. One is correct. So we have correct this essential religious practices. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So as you mentioned, correct. In our context, is panth nirapeksh, not secularism as such. Hmm.
Right.
So can we legally? I'm not sure. It's a kind of idea that can we actually petition the court? Okay, and correct. We have Vaishnavites. Correct. So I think the Ramakrishna Mission itself actually legally proved that they are a different sect itself from Hinduism, and they have retained their minority status to run their own institution.
Right.
Correct. So can can we, like, rather than making not lot of wholesale changes into the constitution itself, because that is a bit difficult task, to actually use the existing laws, okay, and clauses to actually regain our sacred places for all the, for Shaivites, for Vaishnavites, okay, to actually regain their religious places via this laws and provisions.
Right. I have a very strong opinion on,
Hmm.
on this issue actually.
Hmm.
One is that, at the surface level, there is no issue.
Hmm.
कि लेट्स गो विद दिस पाथ कि वैष्णविज्म अपने आप को एक रिलीजन डिक्लेयर करे या एक
Hmm.
माइनॉरिटी सेक्ट डिक्लेयर
Hmm.
करे,
Hmm. Hmm.
शैविज्म अपने
Hmm.
आप को माइनॉरिटी सेक्ट डिक्लेयर करे, शाक्त डू द
Hmm.
सेम थिंग, गाणपत्य,
Hmm.
अद्वैत वाले, शुद्ध अद्वैत, सारे अपने अपने रिलीजन या सेक्ट बना ले और
Hmm.
माइनॉरिटी स्टेटस ले ले.
Hmm.
बट ये लोग तो छोड़ेंगे नहीं ना. सी सेकुलरिज्म इज अ ब्लैक होल. ब्लैक होल क्या होता है? नो मैटर वेदर यू आर स्टैटिक और यू आर मूविंग अराउंड द ब्लैक होल, इट डज नॉट मैटर,
Hmm. Hmm.
यू आर फॉलिंग इनटू द ब्लैक होल।
Hmm.
तो अब क्या करेगा? अब अब्राहमिज्म का नेक्स्ट स्टेप क्या होगा? अगर वंस यू स्टार्ट डिफाइनिंग कि आई एम सेपरेट फ्रॉम दिस, कमल हसन का मान लेते हैं कि अरे वी आर
Hmm.
शैव, वी आर नॉट
Hmm.
हिंदू, Abrahamism will create a situation where Shaiva
Hmm.
and Vaishnava will start to fight with each other. So this actually, now when this situation appears, you are actually moving away from the Advaita perspective of our religion.
Hmm. Hmm.
कि हमें आपस में कोई झगड़ा नहीं है, कोई लड़ाई नहीं
Hmm.
है, वी आर एक्चुअली वन।
Hmm.
फिर जब माइनॉरिटी सेक्ट डिक्लेयर कर दोगे, फिर वो अपने आप बुक लिखने लगेगा जिसमें दूसरे
Hmm.
रिलीजन को छोटा करने लगेगा। सो दे विल क्रिएट द बाइनरिटी ऑफ आइडेंटिटी व्हिच विल टेक अस अवे फ्रॉम द अद्वैत रियलाइजेशन। और वो करेगा, अब्राहमिज्म वो करेगा, क्योंकि वो ऐसे करेगा तो फिर उसको, अगर हिंदुइज्म टूटता है यहाँ से, तो फिर एक्चुअली हिंदुइज्म को मतलब खत्म करना आसान रहेगा।
Hmm.
अगेंस्ट द प्रिंसिपल जहाँ पे सारे विष्णु शिव जी को पूज रहे हैं, शिव विष्णु को पूज रहे हैं, ये जब तक है यहाँ पे फिर घुसना मुश्किल है। जहाँ पे हम लोग एक दूसरे से अलग कर लेंगे, एक रिलीजन को दूसरे रिलीजन से अलग कर देंगे, तो वो एक एक करके वो निपटाएगा। जस्ट लाइक दे हैव ट्रीटेड डिफरेंट सिविलाइजेशंस,
Hmm.
कि सारे जो सिविलाइजेशनल एक्सचेंज होता था उसको पूरा बंद कर
Hmm.
दिया, एक डार्क एज क्रिएट
Hmm.
किया।
Hmm.
डार्क एज के अंदर दे हैव स्टार्टेड टू कन्वर्ट डिफरेंट सोसाइटीज, राइट?
Yes. So let me give you a bit counter, not counter, but one more argument. Okay. The argument is that correct. So we define panths. Okay. Okay. Vaishnav panth hai, Shaivites hai. Okay. Or there are many. Even within Shaivites there are many different. Even within Vaishnavism there are many things. Okay.
राइट।
Many sects are there. So, but they all call themselves Hindus.
हम्म।
So their tilak, correct, vibhuti. Actually, the color and the shape and the way they put the vibhuti actually define which sect they belong to.
राइट।
So they have disagreements, but overall they identify as Hindus.
हम्म।
So this like continuous argument is going on for thousands of years.
राइट।
Okay. So inherently, if and correct and that we call is correct a dharmic space or dharmic panth.
हम्म।
So Saivism is a dharmic panth. Okay, Advaita is a
राइट।
dharmic panth. Okay, except Ajivikas and Charvaks, everybody like they are like a fringe, if you can say fringes.
हम्म।
So we only had Ajivikas and Charvaks who were like against the dharmic principles in general.
राइट।
So apart from that, we had sects, even Buddhism, Jainism. Okay, they are all dharmic panths in
राइट।
that way. So if the Hindu society actually can uh, agree on a like architecture of dharmic space, okay, or what's say overall dharmic umbrella, and under that umbrella everybody coexists, okay, and which actually already exist. Everybody have their own traditions, own rituals, but they all are Hindus.
हम्म।
So if that can be formalized in a legal way, that can lead to a solution, like not a permanent but a midterm solution.
राइट।
And also Rishi have so Rishi will also will have his say. I think Rishi has.
No, मतलब what kind of solution you are talking about?
See, I am talking about is because when they are saying essential religious practices, correct? So
हम्म।
Shaivite practice is very different from a Vaishnavite practice.
राइट।
Okay, so we can. I'm just floating an idea. I'm not a legal expert or something like that. But we can take that argument and actually call ourselves. Call Vaishnavites a minority and get our places of worship back and run on its own.
No, so the point here is let's say we have differences,
Hmm. Hmm.
but why to acknowledge them before the court?
Because
Why?
that
Matlab,
is the
why
yeah.
allow them to
Hmm.
enter
Hmm. Hmm.
through those crevices? Why show them those? These are not crevices, but
Hmm. Hmm.
why to even let them explore? Ki we have this
Hmm.
difference so that they can create crevices out of it, out of the difference. In our eyes, the differences are not. I mean, in our eyes, the differences are superficial differences.
Exactly.
These are the difference in the booth look. But in the eyes of a court, those will be absolute differences.
Got
Because
it.
the court is saying ki, okay, we care about your connection with your conscience, but no, they don't really care, because they can anyway, matlab, any time they can intrude into your space. Because see, conscience and me and my connection, although there are scriptures, but the conscience is not defined like the God defined in Abrahamic morality. So when the conscience is not well defined in scientific or in, I mean, in our meta science, this is fine, but the metaphysics is not going to be accepted before in the eyes of the court. So all they care about are the physical differences. The Abrahamism, those are very physical ideologies. Those are not like, they don't care about metaphysical sort of metaphors, similes, and all those construction. Right? We have our construction. Okay, there is a Gajanan who demolished all these sort of Gajasur and six Asur, who are basically the epitome of what the idol of what, काम क्रोध मद लोभ मोह. उनको जब खत्म करते हो, फिर ईगो खत्म हो जाता है, तब फिर गजानन गणपति बनता है. राइट? गणपति मतलब is basically the diminution and basically it's killing of your own ego, right? सो इस ये सब कोर्ट के सामने उनको तो ये सब अनसाइंटिफिक लगता है. कोर्ट के सामने जो एक्सेप्टेड है, वो जो जो सुपरस्टिशन एक्सेप्टेड है कोर्ट के सामने, वो कुरान और बाइबल का सुपरस्टिशन है. हिंदुओं का सुपरस्टिशन एक्सेप्टेड भी नहीं है, और हिंदुओं का जो कॉन्शियंस है, मेटाफिजिक्स है, वो भी कोर्ट के सामने सुपरस्टिशन है. सो ये जो यूनिटी हमने क्रिएट किया है थ्रू मेटाफिजिकल कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ आवर रिलीजियन, ये तो कोर्ट में एक्सेप्टेड ही नहीं है. तो जब मिलाने की बात आएगा कोई केस में, वही दूसरा बंदा जाएगा, वो तो ड्यूटी लेके नहीं जाएगा ना, वो अपना राइट लेके जाएगा. और वो कोई अब्राहमिक बंदा ही होगा, कोई क्रिप्टो क्रिश्चियन होगा, और उस पर जो जजमेंट आएगा, वो एक को फेवर करेगा, एक को स्कोल्ड करेगा. एक रिलीजन, एक पंथ को ऊपर दिखाएगा, दूसरे को नीचे दिखाएगा. सो फिर ऐसे क्रिएट करो तो फिर कोर्ट को फिर थोड़ा और जगह मिल जाएगा घुसने का. राइट? तो
Okay.
क्यों क्यों देना है?
Rishi. Acha, Rishi, do you have your views on this? And Rishi also has. I think we have a question here. So go ahead, Rishi.
Namaste, Vijitda. Namaste, Vimash Dada.
नमस्ते.
And also to all of the audiences who are there right now. Uh, so, Vimash Dada, the thing which you asked for, right? So,
Hmm.
at least legal, like I'm taking it just for the experiment sake.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
the legal configuration of, let's say, um, mapping out all of the sampradayas and how they are
Hmm.
Hindu. So you're seeing that,
Hmm.
right? So if we could do
Hmm.
that at least, uh, I think this could be done. But the problem that I see is, at least within our sides, uh, at least like the modernist Hindus, they do not have any idea of epistemology within Hindu knowledge systems. So that's a great problem actually. Which is why they are also unable to argue in front of courts, even like how Bijida explained, right? So in many court cases, they have to like prove essential religious practices, and so for that they have to bring out references from some books or something. Uh, Show me some shastras of yours, and then we will decide, okay, this is a correct practice and so on. Uh, which, by the way, side note, many of the Christians cannot even then practice many things, because in Bible there are no such things like incense and so on and so forth. What they do right now in Kerala and elsewhere.
Right.
Uh, let's leave that aside. So, on the case of Hindus, I think because they cannot argue what our epistemology is and how it's not tenable for the court to say that, okay, if it's in your book, then alone it's true, or else we shall reject it. So, until and unless we learn to argue against that, I don't think that we can even think of even arranging all the sampradayas in a legal sense to converge into a Hindu label as well. Because without this knowledge of
You see what has happened.
epistemology,
Sorry. Huh.
hmm,
What has happened
bolo.
with Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, and Sikh? सनातनी बोलते थे ना. Now you see Khalistani movement, you see Buddhism, Neo Buddhism. यही है ना. पहले तो एक थे, फिर कोर्ट ने मतलब ऑब्वियसली लेजिस्लेशन के थ्रू तोड़ा गया. अब तो बिल्कुल ही अलग हो गया है. अब तो मतलब बुद्धिज्म पता नहीं, वी कैन नॉट इवन आइडेंटिफाई द न्यू बुद्धिज्म विद बुद्धिज्म. राइट. तो वही होने वाला है
हाँ.
आगे. आगे बोल देंगे कि अरे ये लोग काले थे, या फिर कुछ भी, मतलब बंगाली लोग काले होते हैं और वो चावल खा के मोटे हो जाते हैं, तो इसीलिए शिव के पूजा करते हैं. और चंडी का पूजा पंजाबी वाले करते हैं क्योंकि वो चिकन खाते हैं, और उनका हट्टा कट्टा है, तो वो शक्ति की पूजा करते हैं. तो ये दो लोग, ये बेसिकली चंडी और शिव आपस में इनका झगड़ा इसीलिए चलता रहता है क्योंकि शिव के साइड जो बारात वाले हैं वो मोटे हैं, और पार्वती वाले हट्टे का. तो कुछ भी कर देंगे ना ये. दे कैन कम अप विद एनी लेम एक्सक्यूज टू क्रिएट डिवीजन बिटवीन डिफरेंट पंथ्स. तो उतना स्पेस छोड़ना ही क्यों है.
अच्छा, but that is correct. That is a political, माने religion itself, correct. It has a political face. It has a like a scripture face, correct. So are we
No,
going to?
again,
Hmm.
in our podcast, what we learned, Cicero's design, right? Whatever scriptural is cult, they are not religion first of all. ठीक है.
Hmm.
अगर
Hmm.
उतना ले लेता ना, अगर सिसेरो का डिजाइन नहीं लेता तो ये प्रॉब्लम, ये पंगा आता ही नहीं. फिर हिंदुइज्म ऑटोमेटिकली रिलीजियन होते हैं और ये सब कल्ट हो जाते हैं. सीधी सी बात है. लेकिन दिस शोज की द कोर्ट हैज टेकन द अब्राहमिक पाथ एंड नॉट द पाथ ऑफ द सिसेरो. राइट.
Got it. So let's discuss this point. I have some disagreements on secularism. Really is Christian at all, but we can discuss. So, Rishi, what do you think?
Yeah, so on secularism really being Christian, actually I read two contradicting some papers actually on this issue. So how Jacob D. Ruver G says that uh, even though there is something called secularism, but it is mired by Christian morality behind it. So he gives an example of, I think Bijeet can talk about this. So in Italy, one atheist woman tried to uh, get an admission for her son. So there she saw in a public school cross, I guess, the Christian cross. So she filed a case, and that actually went to I think in Hague, I guess, the International Court of Justice. I think it went over there, and then there was this judgment about Christian secularism, like how secularism is mired in Christian background and how it's a fall of that tree, in fact.
Right.
So this issue. So there is this one like one kind of approach. There is this another kind which came out of one of the greatest sociologists India produced, but never he was appreciated, Professor A.K. Saran. So in his work, he has shown that secularism is actually, what should I say, uh, mm, like it was a revolt, kind of like within Middle Ages, when there were so much of bloodshed in the name of Christianity, many of the uh, like in Italy especially, many guys, when they started to read classics which were getting translated from Toledo and so on, from Spain, and those were coming there, and while reading the classics of Greeks and so on, they thought that uh, there should be an approach from physical sense, or at least from philosophical sense, to even uh, clear some of the theological problems, like for say how Galileo tried to solve a theological problem of where is the heaven. So outside the earth, like Christianity has this, right? Bijeet can say on this. Christianity has this whole conception of a geocentric model. So there are firmament and so on and so forth. So he tried to solve this, but using not scripture but physical process, like made a telescope and looked out there, and lo and behold, he disproved the Christian myth, and it was fatal for him. So this approach actually uh, came in, and what A.K. Saran tries to say that even though both Christianity and Islam both are Abrahamic, somehow secularism arose in Christianity and not in Islam. So why is that the case? And then he posits that because Christianity at its origin had to, uh, as Vijida also says, right, that from Saint Augustine onwards, that they had to engulf in all of the Greco-Roman elements into themselves. So what happened was there were two contradictory traditions within Christianity, and they could not integrate with each other. So one was secularism, where human being was the supreme, and the other was Christianism, in which the God in heaven is the supreme. So basically, secularism led to this whole human centricism. Like there is a Latin word also, I guess. I don't know. Let me see. So okay, maybe I'm not getting that. So basically, human centricism replaced God centricism. So the transcendent and the heaven, those were denied, whereas human centricism came in, and therefore it also led to something called de-Christianization, as they say. Like Christianity got pummeled heavily in later, at least in later Enlightenment. So like Holbach, uh, German atheist, David Hume, so on and so forth. Like they are coming out, Voltaire and all. Everyone
Right.
is anti-Christian in their vocabulary, in their works, and so on. So secularism led to actually destruction of Christianity in West, and which we see also right now in Europe, at least, not in Americas, Europe at least. So these are the two streams of thought that I've seen. So maybe Bijitda and Vimas Dada, you can please comment on these two
No, I
approaches.
mean, in my opinion, this is another stream of thought. Obviously, another line of thought. But what to add here? Another point is that obviously, um, all the Abrahamic religion, they have some inherent duality in themselves, right? जैसे कल क्रिश्चियन स्लेवरी का बात चल रहा था, वहां पे भी चल रहा था कि जो स्लेव रहेंगे, शुड वी मेक देम क्रिश्चियन और नॉट, कि पहले तो ये होता था कि जो स्लेव होते थे वो नॉन क्रिश्चियन होते थे एज पर द जस्टिनियंस कोड. हाँ, एज पर जस्टिनियन कोड स्लेव क्रिश्चियन हो सकते थे, राइट? बट नॉन क्रिश्चियन कैन नॉट हैव क्रिश्चियन स्लेव. बट फिर जो प्रोटेस्टेंट आ गए, उनके दिमाग में था कि क्रिश्चियंस आर फ्री, नॉन क्रिश्चियंस आर नॉट फ्री, दे आर द स्लेव्स. तो इस तरह का डुअलिज्म तो ये अब्राहमिक रिलीजन में चलता रहता है, और ये जरूरी इसलिए भी होता है क्योंकि दे आर लाइक कैमिलियन, राइट? दे चेंज देयर whole color depending on the socio-political environment of a place or of a time. तो हाँ, उस हिसाब से फिर क्रिश्चियनिज्म में भी ये डुअलिटी है, और इट इज अनडिनाइबल फैक्ट कि काफी सारे एलिमेंट ग्रेको रोमन ट्रेडिशन से इन्होंने उधारी में लिया है, राइट? तो ऑब्वियसली नाउ अगर ह्यूमन सेंट्रिसिज्म जो जो जिसको फिर आगे बढ़ा के ये जैसे आज मैंने जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल का ये वाला डिस्कस किया जो हार्म प्रिंसिपल है, फिर दैट लेड टू इंडिविजुअलिज्म। नाउ दैट इज अनदर एक्सट्रीम, ठीक है, कि द स्टेट विल डायरेक्टली टॉक टू द इंडिविजुअल एंड देयर वोंट बी एनी सोसाइटी इन बिटवीन। सो दैट इज अनदर एक्सट्रीम जहाँ पे फिर एक इंडिविजुअल का फिर कुछ कुछ बचता ही नहीं है अदर देन मतलब some fragmented set of rights. When you treat an individual just as an isolated individual without the environment in which he or she is dwelling in, फिर वो एक्सट्रीम अलग ही एक्सट्रीम हो जाता है। फिर वहां से तो फिर आज का जो मॉडर्न प्रॉब्लम है वो चालू हो जाता है जो हमें दिख भी रहा है। So that is if you're categorizing individualism as the Christian secularism, then that is also problematic, right? उससे अच्छा ये है कि you understand, you don't sort of victimize yourself. You understand that you are actually, you have an element of God inside you. You just do your karma, you perform your duty, you perform your whatever duty to the society, to yourself, to Daiva, to ancestors, and all this rain, right? Pancharin jo hota hai. So that way, I think construction makes sense. And Hindu society को ये in spite of many जन विध्वंस and all these things वो stable रखा है हिंदुओं को। बट अभी अगर तुम हिंदू सेकुलरिज्म या हिंदू यूनिवर्सलिज्म को फिर वही मतलब स्ट्रिप ऑफ करके इंडिविजुअलिज्म की तरफ ले जाओगे, फिर उससे भी आई थिंक एब्नॉर्मलिटी आएगा। नो वंडर, राइट? अभय कैन जॉइन एक्चुअली।
I think
हाँ,
tomorrow may have office, so that's what might.
अच्छा अच्छा।
Tomorrow is the office,
लीगल
correct, for a lot of.
legal
Yeah.
constitutional terms are not properly defined. Hindu is not defined for that matter. Hinduism is not defined. Our elites do not want to define because we struggle. First principle and ambiguity gives the discretionary power. We don't need the constitution to define Hinduism. इस बात पे तो मैं अड़ा रहूंगा। हमें डिफाइन, हमारा ये सिविलाइजेशन है और हम लोग जिस तरह से हैं, हम हिंदू है। इसके आगे मुझे कोई, क्योंकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन टॉप डाउन एजेंडा है, वो जब डिफाइन भी करेंगे उनका कुछ एजेंडा रहेगा। ये हमारा, अगर
Yeah,
अगर मान
Bijitda.
लीजिए आपका मकान है, आपका मकान है, उस मकान में 4 लोग रह रहे हैं, चारों को पता है कि चारों लोगों का ये मकान है, फिर आके फिर कोई तोड़ने लगेगा कि आप ये हो आप वो, नहीं चाहिए ना भाई। ये हमारा मकान है, हम लोग रहते हैं। बाहर से कोई एक बुक लिख के फिर चंदा मांगने आया, फिर चंदा से डिफाइन किया, अरे आप तो गरीब हो, आप तो अमीर हो, आप ज्यादा कमाते हो, आप कम कमाते हो, नहीं चाहिए ना ये सब चीजें। हमें हमारा नेचुरल मोरालिटी हमारे साथ है, ये हमारा सिविलाइजेशन है, उसमें जो हिस्सा लेता है वो हिंदू है, जो बाहर से सबवर्शन लाता है वो, और जो मतलब सावरकर का डेफिनेशन तो बहुत ज्यादा ही अच्छा है उस मामले में, कि जो पितृभूमि और पुण्यभूमि समझता है भारत को, हिंदू है। इट्स एज सिंपल एज दैट, ठीक है। तुम यहाँ इसको अगर बर्बाद करने आओगे तो अजमल कसाब जो है वो हिंदू नहीं है। कोई अगर इधर जो अपना कल्चर है उसमें श्रद्धा रखता है, वेद में अगर श्रद्धा रखता है, वेद को अगर टॉलरेट मतलब एक्सेप्ट कर सकता है, तो वो हिंदू होगा। इसमें प्रॉब्लम क्या है? ठीक है, बाद में फिर घर वापसी के लिए वो तो एक पॉलिटिकल मूवमेंट बनेगा। बट आई डोंट थिंक कि मतलब हमें एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के थ्रू हमें अपना एक्नोलेजमेंट चाहिए। ठीक है, हम लोग कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना रहे हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन हमें नहीं बना रहा है। सो वी हैव टू कीप दैट इन माइंड।
Yes. So I think I'll ask the last question for today. Okay, because I think a lot of questions already being discussed in the lecture itself. Many things. There's one more from Abhay. I will take it later, but this one is there. So, what do you think? Why only dharmic faiths, correct, or the dharmic punths have this propensity to actually prove themselves that we are secular, where the other is not? Is that is that something
ड्यूटी,
inherent
इट
in
कम्स
us?
फ्रॉम अ सेंस ऑफ ड्यूटी। It right. I mean, Muslims don't have the obligation. They don't feel the obligation or
Hmm.
the drive to declare themselves as secular because they care about rights. कि हमारा अपना बुक है, बुक में लिखा हुआ है, हम लोग
Hmm.
आप लोगों को मानना पड़ेगा, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को मानना पड़ेगा. They talk about rights because they're
Hmm.
aggressive, right? They need
Hmm.
to propagate their agenda. That's why they care about right. Only it is only the aggressive puns, aggressive
Hmm.
cults
Hmm.
that care about rights more than they care about duty. It is the non-aggressive native puns that care about duty. है ना? अगर अगर मान लीजिए आपका जमीन है तो उसका कागज आपके पास है और आप हैप्पीली उस जमीन में एक बगीचा बना के आप रह रहे हो, घर बना लिया, कोई कुछ भी है. अब तो हर महीने कोर्ट के पास नहीं जाओगे ना कि दिस इज माय राइट, ये जगह सिक्योर किया जाए, दिस इज माय, ये नहीं करोगे ना. लेकिन कोई अगर वहां पे कोई उस किसी बंदे को एक छेद मिल गया जिसके थ्रू वो घुस सकता है कि सरकारी रिकॉर्ड में कुछ तो डिस्क्रिपेंसी दिख गया, उसके थ्रू थोड़ा जमीन वो कब्जा कर लिया, वो कोर्ट पे जाएगा, ये जमीन मेरा है, ये जमीन मुझे दे दो, इस पे मेरा हक है, राइट है, व्हाटएवर, राइट. तो इट इज ऑल, मतलब जो एग्रेसिव है, थोड़ा बहुत डिसेप्टिव है, वो कोर्ट के पास जाता है टॉकिंग अबाउट राइट्स एंड एवरीथिंग. जो अपना घर समझता है वो तो उसका ड्यूटी निभाता है, राइट.
Okay, we have one more question from Abhay. So, does attachment to Matribhumi mean attachment to Indian nation state? It's a very
अटैचमेंट टू
provocative.
मातृभूमि मीन्स अटैचमेंट टू आवर सिविलाइजेशन. ठीक है. और इस मातृभूमि का हिस्सा सिंधु भी रहा है, सिंध भी रहा है, गांधार भी रहा है, अपना मॉडर्न डे बांग्लादेश हो गया, ब्रह्मदेश हो गया, उत्तर कुरु, ठीक है, जैसे तिब्बत, सारा रहा है. सो अटैचमेंट टू आवर मातृभूमि means attachment to our civilization, which incorporate all these places. And that's the point. We should never lose that big picture in our mind. कि एक जमाना था जहां पे चाइना हमारा जो स्पिरिचुअलिटी वो अडॉप्ट किया था. तो इट इज अपॉन अस, ठीक है, टू कि इंडिया को एक जगह तक पहुंचाओ, ठीक है, एक वेल्दी जगह पे पहुंचाओ, और वहां से फिर जो जो जगह खो गया है उसको रिक्लेम करना चालू करो. Obviously through agenda and through your spirituality, your belief, right? The whole construction of your ideology, faith, इसके थ्रू रिक्लेम करो. बार बार जंग करने की जरूरत नहीं, बिकॉज दैट्स द स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ अस, राइट. कि हम लोग अच्छे से बात कर सकते हैं. हम लोग अच्छे से क्यों बात कर सकते हैं? क्योंकि हमारे लैंग्वेज में वो कंसिस्टेंसी है, ठीक है. इस लैंग्वेज का ओरिजिन हमें पता है, एक एक शब्द का ओरिजिन पता है, इसलिए इंडियन बात करने में इतना अच्छा होता है कंपेयर टू फॉर एग्जांपल चाइनीज, राइट. तो हमें ये बिग मैप जो है, हमारा जो मातृभूमि क्या है, उसका सेंस हमें लूज नहीं करना चाहिए. इंडियन नेशन स्टेट तो अभी एक बहुत छोटा है, ठीक है. और नेशन स्टेट का आइडिया एज वी हैव डिस्कस्ड इट इमर्ज फ्रॉम द ट्रीटी ऑफ वेस्टफेलिया, राइट. तो इंडिया का सिविलाइजेशनल स्टेट है, मोर देन इट इज अ नेशन स्टेट, इट इज अ सिविलाइजेशन स्टेट.
Okay, so this is the last question we will take for today, and then we'll go towards the end of the
Secularism was a
session.
solution to an Abrahamic problem. Was it applied in a why is it applied in a dharmic context where Abrahamic problem did not exist? Right. I mean, that is the question that we are asking time and again. I mean, I have some answer, which is that कि because जिसका हमने आप previous lecture on secularism as a tool of Hindu genocide, ये देख सकते हो,
Hmm.
अपने चैनल में ही है. But the point is कि I think this is because कि by 1947, 1950, India has gone through like a cascade of Janavidhwans, right? 1,000 years of Janavidhwans. तो फिर इंडिया वांटेड टू रीच अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट विद दिस अब्राहमिक पावर्स कि यार एक काम करते हैं, तुमको थोड़ा राइट वाइट देते हैं, लेकिन हमें इतना अटैक मत करो. ठीक है, पाकिस्तान एक ये स्टेट बन गया, इस्लामिक स्टेट बन गया, बट हमारे सेकुलर स्टेट है, तो हम सबका देखभाल कर सकते हैं, क्रिश्चियन का भी देखभाल कर सकते हैं. तो जो डीप स्टेट है उधर का, ठीक है, जो एक्सिस है, वेस्टर्न एक्सिस, तो तुम लोग हमें इन्वेंट ना करो, अरब को भी बोल दिया यार आप लोग भी इन्वेड ना करो, हम लोग संभाल लेंगे सब कुछ, ठीक है. सो दिस वाज अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट which came in the form of this secularism. So it was a contract out of 1,000 year of that came out of 1,000 year of Hindu zimmihood. ठीक है. And obviously because the problem is that कि a genocided, colonized or zimmi state can never forge a true synthesis between freedom and rationality. राइट. तो ये भी हमने डिस्कस किया इन डिटेल इन दैट प्रीवियस पॉडकास्ट कि अगर बिकॉज वी आर जिम्मी स्टेट, बिकॉज वी आर दिस कॉलोनाइज स्टेट, जनविध्वंस स्टेट, we could never forge a true synthesis between rationality and the idea of rationality and idea of freedom, right? Because okay, so let me read that part. How would one recognize a genocide, Janavidwan's colonized Zimmi state? The answer lies not in the external marker of oppression. No, it is far subtler than that. The true mark of such a state is found in the distortion of its most sacred primal force, freedom. In a colonized this Janabidhan state, freedom and rationality are not bound together in their natural dynamic relationship. They are in fact divided, betrayed, and disfigured. This split is the very signature of a Zimmi state, an artificial stunted creature where freedom is compromised at every turn, often justified by the most elaborate, rationalized, and eschatological explanation. राइट कि इंडियन स्टेट हमें क्या बोलता है कि थोड़ा बहुत अभी कॉम्प्रोमाइज कर लो, थोड़ा जितने भी तुम्हारे जो मंदिर टूटे हैं ना उसका केस थोड़ा रख देते हैं, थोड़ा छुपा के रखते हैं, कुछ जजमेंट नहीं सुनाते हैं. 20 साल वेट कर लो, 20 साल में तुम एक डेवलप्ड कंट्री बन जाओगे. तब तुम अपना टेम्पल रिक्लेम कर लेना. या फिर सुनाते हैं कि यार थोड़ा सा मेहनत कर लो और जितना भी ये जो टेम्पल हमारे कंट्रोल में है, सरकार के कंट्रोल में, थोड़ा सा मेहनत कर लो, थोड़ा टाइम मतलब हमें दे दो, फिर हमारे समाज में पूरा इक्वलिटी आ जाएगा. और जब इक्वलिटी आ जाएगा, जब कोट एंड कोट कास्टिज्म खत्म हो जाएगा, तब तुम्हें टेम्पल वापस कर देंगे. सो एट एवरी पॉइंट दे आर सेइंग कि बिकॉज यू गाइज आर जिम्मीज, तो या तो तुम रैशनलिटी चूज करो या फिर उसके साथ थोड़ा कॉम्प्रोमाइज करो, या फिर थोड़ा फ्रीडम चूज करो या उसके साथ कॉम्प्रोमाइज करो. But because we are the state, we are the state created by you Zimmis. You Zimmis have the responsibility to protect this state because the state, as a state, we are protecting you Zimmis. तुम्हारे साथ बहुत बुरा हुआ है, बट क्योंकि हम यहाँ एग्जिस्ट कर रहे हैं ना इंडियन स्टेट, इसलिए हम तुम लोगों को वो जो जनविध्वंस हुआ है उससे तो प्रोटेक्ट तो कर रहे हैं. तो जिंदा रहो, इसलिए तो थोड़ा शुक्रिया अदा करो, बाद में अपना राइट पूछ लेना या फिर अपना रैशनलिटी पूछ लेना, अपना फ्रीडम के लिए पूछ लेना. थोड़ा मेहनत करो और हमें थोड़ा फीड करो, ठीक है. तो हमें थोड़ा हमारे साथ एक कॉम्प्रोमाइज करो, थोड़ा फ्रीडम. सो इसीलिए इसीलिए और ये जो कॉम्प्रोमाइज है, ये जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट हमने साइन किया है विद द इंडियन स्टेट एज हिंदूज, दिस इज सेकुलरिज्म.
Okay, so hold on. Yeah. So okay, so the okay. Bashalidi is here. Great discussion, listening with rapt attention while making brunch.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Shalini.
Hmm.
You could join
Okay.
though. You could
Uh,
join. Yeah.
no, I think she is busy with her other things. Okay. So anyway, so we are at the end of the session itself. So what you said is that makes a lot of sense. Okay, but I would like to say a different thing. I was in a conference, not a kind of conference, some discussion. Okay, a closed door one. Okay, where one person actually mentioned something very revealing. He said that for 1,000 years we have actually studied ourselves, who we are. We are Vaishnavites, Shivites, or Hindus, or the Dharmic, whatever we say. But for 1,000 years, actually, we have not studied who is our enemy, and that is have become our Achilles heel. Take the example uh, of two-child policy, okay, or one-child policy. So when the state in 1970s put the a kind of policy that okay, you should have only two child or two child, Only Hindus accepted this, and it was not enforced on others. Now Hindus accepted this as a kind of a, like a logical thing or whatever they thought, but others did not. Now after 3 generations, we see that that policy was designed to create that demographic diversion, okay, or inversion, to actually make Bharat a non-Hindu majority state. You see, so for a
Right.
1,000 years, we have not studied who is our enemy. We have not studied what he is trying to do. We have studied who I am, okay, but we have not studied, and that becomes a very fundamental problem, a fundamental indication of a lot of our problems. And it struck me really well that he's talking about something which is important. That if
Swayambodh
I
and
know,
Shatrubodh.
yes, see, not about Shatrubodh even. See, Shatrubodh means I know that that person doesn't want good for me. That can be correct, Shatrubodh. What I'm talking about is this methodical study of your enemy or of your opponent. Like, correct, in a cricket match, correct, in a cricket match or a football match, every individual player is marked that how where he plays, and they have a strategy for every player how to bowl or how to bat on these wickets and how it happens. For 1,000 years, we have not done this. We have not studied our enemy enough, and that's
But
why
we are doing now. We are doing
when
now.
yes, we are doing now, but still, I think we are in a very nascent stage of that aspect.
That's true. That is true. But ठीक है, कर लेंगे. The point is, secularism as a principle need to go. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so
Uh,
Sri Harsha has a par excellent analysis. Could you share the source material? Is it
yes,
Dr.
much
Jacob de
of it,
Roover's work?
much of it is coming from Jacob de Roover's work. I have punched with my own notes in some places. And then in some places, I have discussed from JSI Deepak's book as well. So these are the principal materials that I have used.
Uh, like, I would request everybody who are listening to this. So you need to, at the individual level itself, okay, try to understand your opponent. Okay, that's very important for us to actually even fight the battle. Right now, we are not doing this. Okay. We
Right,
are reacting. We are reacting to a lot of things.
right.
Okay. So yeah, she's saying there is an article called there's an article called "We Shall Never." So at the individual level, we need to start doing this. Okay, and even try to actually, in your conversations with your friends, family, and whoever you are talking about, get that aspect on, because if you see, the our opponent exactly knows who is the friend, who is an enemy. Unfortunately, as Hindu society, as us individuals, we are confused. Okay, so let me actually show you something. So correct, when we are talking about, let me just get this. So this is the book by Mr. Nitin Sridhar. So this book is the Sublimala Confusion: Mensuration Across Cultures. So this book was written probably after the judgment of Shabrimala, where he documents it legally and culturally. There's one more book on Shabrimala that also I actually had. So we need these kinds of works, okay, where these things are discussed in detail. But one thing is very important, that we need to study the opponent very carefully as a society and also as individuals, and then try to do something from our end, whatever little we can do.
Yeah, it's like basically it is reciprocal thinking. तो
Hmm.
जैसे क्या होता है, मैं एक एग्जांपल देता हूँ कि काफी टाइम ये होता है ना कि टेंथ में जब बेसिकली आई वाज वेरी वीक इन हिस्ट्री, ओके. तो एक टाइम था नाइन्थ के बाद आई वाज लाइक यार हिस्ट्री तो पढ़ना पड़ेगा, लेकिन इतना बड़ा सिलेबस है तो कवर कैसे करें. और उस टाइम पे बंगाल स्टेट बोर्ड का बहुत बड़ा सिलेबस था और उसमें बड़े क्वेश्चन भी आते थे, राइट. कि 5 बड़ा क्वेश्चन और फिर कुछ टीका आता था जो. सो 5 बड़ा क्वेश्चन, आई थिंक 10 मल्टीप्लाइड बाई 5, देन 5 टीका इज लाइक 2.5 मल्टीप्लाइड बाई 5, ऐसा कुछ था। um, ऐसे करके कुछ मार्क्स। तो एनीवे, तो आई वाज लाइक यार इतना बड़ा सिलेबस तो करे कैसे। देन आई स्टार्टेड टू थिंक द अदर वे, राइट, कि क्वेश्चन क्या क्या आ सकता है, राइट, कि यू ऑलवेज थिंक कि यार जो, या फिर व्हेन यू आर इन कॉलेज जहाँ पे काफी बड़ा सिलेबस है और बहुत सारी चीजें समझ में नहीं आता है। सेमिस्टर एक 3 महीने का होता है, तो काफी सारे सब्जेक्ट तो ऐसे ही बस रट के जाते थे, राइट। तो लेकिन वो समझना जरूरी है कि क्लास अटेंड करके वो प्रॉफ सोचता कैसे है, तो फिर वो क्वेश्चन क्या डालेगा, किस तरह का। तो फिर वहां से क्या होता है, यू कैन क्रिएट अ हायरार्की। अच्छा, ये क्वेश्चन सुपर इंपॉर्टेंट है, ये इस बंदे को पसंद है ना, बार बार ऐसे ही बात करता रहता है। फिर कौन किसके बारे में बात नहीं करता, या फिर अपने नोट से चाप दिया ब्लैक बोर्ड में, तो शायद उसके बारे में पूछेगा नहीं, बिकॉज दिस गाय इज नॉट पैशनेट अबाउट दिस। तो ये थोड़ा अंदाजा लगाना पड़ता है। तो मैं एक अपना इवेंट बताता हूँ, हिस्ट्री का ही है। तो 10th का ये टेस्ट एग्जाम था। टेस्ट मतलब जो मेन एग्जाम से पहले एक हमारे उस टाइम पे एग्जाम होता था, जो स्कूल मतलब 10th एक स्टेट लेवल पे एग्जाम होता है, उससे पहले स्कूल लेवल का एक एग्जाम होता है 10th का ही, 3 महीने पहले कुछ। तो मेरे हिस्ट्री टीचर ने मुझे फिर चैलेंज दिया था, ठीक है, कि 10 मार्क्स का जो शॉर्ट क्वेश्चन आता है उस पे तू कुछ उखाड़ नहीं पाएगा, ठीक है, बिल्कुल ही मतलब दांत फोटाते पार बिना टाइप है व्यापार। तो आई वाज लाइक अच्छा, बहुत आप डिफिकल्ट बनाने वाले होंगे। तो हम सब ने काफी मतलब पंप अप किया अपने टीचर को कि सर डालो, सर बहुत डिफिकल्ट डालो, क्या करें। फिर उसका एक ऑल्टरनेट होता था कि 10 ऐसे ऑब्जेक्टिव क्वेश्चन का आंसर करो, नहीं तो मैप पॉइंटिंग होता था कि प्लेस पाटलिपुत्रो, हाँ कश्मीर का ये जगह, फिर उज्जैन, ये सब मैप पॉइंटिंग होता था। तो मैं ऑब्जेक्टिव क्वेश्चन वो सब मैं अटेम्प्ट ही नहीं किया, मैं मैप पॉइंटिंग करके गया। तो क्योंकि मुझे पता था मैप पॉइंटिंग तो वही टिपिकल 30-40 जगह है, वो रट के जाऊंगा तो उसमें तो 5 जगह तो आ ही जाएगा, तो मुझे 10 में 5 मिल ही जाएगा। सो जस्ट टू अंडरस्टैंड कि वो दूसरा बंदा सोच कैसे सकता है, और उसके हिसाब से अपने स्ट्रेटेजी बनाना, दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट टू कम आउट ऑफ योर ओन ईगो एंड योर ओन फ्रेमवर्क, कि चलो सर आप बोल रहे हो मैं करके दे दूंगा आपका, ऐसा नहीं है। यू ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड द पर्सन ऑपोजिट यू एंड यू जस्ट क्रिएट योर ओन पाथ। ये हिंदुओं ने नहीं किया है। हिंदू हिंदू बेसिकली क्या, वो अपने जो डंजन है उसके अंदर रह गया, कि ब्रह्म को लेके आलोचना करते हैं। अरे उसका मतलब फिजिकल इम्प्लीकेशन क्या है, ये यूज करके अगर तुम क्या क्या जीत सकते हो, राइट। वहां पे हम लोग थोड़ा पीछे रह गए, ये तो ये बात हमें मानना पड़ेगा। और जबकि एक चीज वियर्ड है, राइट, हम लोग सब चीज देखते हैं आज के जमाने में। कोई भी प्रोजेक्ट अगर आता है, वी जस्ट लुक टू द यूएसए, राइट, कि उनका जो डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ एनर्जी है वहां से क्या क्या प्रोजेक्ट इन्होंने अप्रूव किया है, उस हिसाब से यहाँ पे प्रोजेक्ट अलॉट होता है, इंडिया में प्रोजेक्ट अप्रूव होता है। तो ये प्रपोजल अगर एकेडमिया से जाता है साइंटिफिक प्रोजेक्ट के लिए, तो दे ऑलवेज लुक टू द वेस्ट। लेकिन उनसे हम ये नहीं सीखते कि क्रिश्चियनिज्म कैसे फैला और हमें फैलाने के लिए क्या करना है। ये पार्ट हम लोग नहीं सीखते, यहाँ पे हम डिफेंसिव हो जाते हैं। ये बहुत ही एक वियर्ड हिंदू माइंड में एक पैराडॉक्स है, बिकॉज मे बी कि हिंदू 1000 सालों से वो बिल्कुल ही मतलब श्रिंक होते होते ऐसी जगह पहुंच गया कि उसके दिमाग में आ ही नहीं सकता कि वो एक्सपैंड कर सकता है। ये एक प्रॉब्लम है जो हमें टैकल करना पड़ेगा, और हम लोग कर रहे हैं अभी।
Okay, Rishi, you want to say something before we close?
Yeah, so 2 points, I guess. Br- Before that, brilliant podcast आज का हुआ है, and next series में कुछ है क्या, like part 11?
पार्ट 11 हम सोच रहे थे, पार्ट 11 में अगर मतलब वी नो द बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर, राइट। द मैं सोच रहा था कि इंटेंशन वर्सेस ये मोरालिटी रख दूं, अपना इंटेंशन मोरालिटी वर्सेस स्पॉन्टेनियस मोरालिटी, जस्ट टू शो कि हाउ देयर इंटेंशन मोरालिटी, क्रिश्चियनिज्म एंड अब्राहमिज्म इज इंटेंशन मोरालिटी, and how our morality is sort of spontaneous morality, natural morality. बट इसको फिर हम लोग एक काम करते हैं, यहाँ पे हम लोग खत्म कर सकते हैं क्रिश्चियनिज्म को, एंड वी कैन टेक इट टू द इंडियन पॉलिटिकल थियरी, आवर नेक्स्ट लेक्चर सीरीज. तो वहाँ पे मैंने हिंदू मोरालिटी वर्सेस नेचुरल मोरालिटी एक मैंने पार्ट 2 में रखा है, तो ये चीज को वहां डाल सकते हैं.
Yeah, I think
यहाँ पे क्लोज करते हैं. अगर भूपेंद्र बोलते हैं कि कुछ टॉपिक रह गया है क्रिश्चियनिज्म में, तो वो डिस्कस कर सकते हैं, नहीं तो हम लोग लेट्स मूव ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट वेंचर.
yes, let's review the whole series of Christianism and see if we have missed something, then we will add it, or else we'll keep it as it is. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. And for people who are watching, so we are at 1599 subscribers. So we request everybody to support us and get past 1600. And we are planning to do 2000 subscribers in next 2 months. So do share our content with us. Okay. Request people to subscribe to us so that we can grow and we can produce more better podcasts with us. So thank you everybody.
थैंक्स. यस, ये हमें पहले बताना चाहिए था वैसे.
No, actually, I was waiting for this 99 to be there.
अच्छा.
Okay, so yeah, so Rishi, anything?
हाँ, sorry, मैं भूल ही गया था. So the 2 points which I had started with, right?
इंडियन पॉलिटिकल थियरी का जो सीरीज है, उसका जो लेक्चर्स है, वो कंटेंट मतलब टाइटल हम लोग डाल देंगे, तो ऋषि आप भी देख लेना थोड़ा, तो वी कैन टेक द डिस्कशन अहेड. हाँ,
फाइन.
आप कुछ बोल.
एकदम. हाँ. So the points which I had tonight at least mentioned about, so on epistemology and on A.K. Saran's analysis. So I will take the first one, just one short point. On the epistemology, I think we should be studying how to gauge our pramanas. So on this, I have a quotation from the controversial text of ours, which gets burnt every year by our enemies. So from that text, we have a quotation on this. I will just recite that. Vedo khilo dharma moolam smriti shile cha tadvidam acharaschaiva sadhunam atmanastustireva cha. So Manu actually gives us the pramanas. From where do we get dharma as to what is to be done and what not to be done. So it's in a descending order actually. So first and foremost comes Vedas, obviously Vedas, and then Smritis, or as the commentator also says, Smritis are footnotes of made by rishis, expositions on Vedas actually. And then comes what should I say, Acharastheva Sadhunam. So conduct of great men, great men means women included, so great men of any origin within our dharma, their conduct should be our source of dharma as to what should be done and not to be done. So for example, like Shivaji Maharaj, so he reformed the whole Samudra Yatra thing, right, in Marathi community, like Samudra ja sakte ho aap. So that's a dharma achar. So and the last one is Atmanastushti Revacha. So the one which Bijeet always says, so natural morality, that which actually satisfied your inner self at the end of the day. Atmanastushti Revacha. So that's the fourth pramana which Manu gives. So when we actually have this in our mind, we can actually then also prove in front of many dire circumstances that okay, such a like for example any practices which are happening in our temples which are not from any texts per se, like you cannot find any textual mention of that, you can actually prove it by saying Acharastheva Sadhunam. It was done by one of our great acharyas, therefore it is being practiced, and since that is a pramana for us, therefore it's a valid practice henceforth.
Right.
So like that we can actually also different tantras as well. So tantras, so there are some idiots actually who try to say many tantras are different than what is practiced by Vedikas and all nonsense. So
Right.
tantras can be actually put into that category as well again, which has been done actually earlier as well. So these things actually, if we start learning, then we can maybe defend our religion more robustly,
Right.
given the circumstance that we are ruled by our enemies, especially in judiciary and academia. That
Right.
was the first one. And the second point on AK Sharan. So something which I missed actually. So what AK Saran was saying was that secularism was actually something going to happen anyway within Christianity because of it engulfing a very pagan tradition like Greco-Roman philosophies and its contradiction with actual Christianism. Uh, in fact, so AK Sharan refers to some of the scholars like Leuven and Toynbee to say that in Christian tradition, man, the world, and the gods constitute a total reality that is completely rejected because there is no creator, God, or history in them. So, according to many Western scholars by that time, Christianism actually, uh, supposedly according to them, God and history are key points for Christianity.
Right.
Every action in Christianity is a historical action. It's something historically it must be done in a timeline. It should be happening. So that is not there in any pagan traditions. Pagan traditions are endless, like
Right.
how Bijidda says that it's self-contained. It's happening like any scientific uh, processes that's happening in nature as well.
Right.
So, unlike that, Christianity is totally mired in historicism. Because of that, secularism also came as a Christian mission in Christianity. Amazingly enough,
Right.
that okay, we need to this is going way into cuckoo land. That also all sorts of nonsense is getting into our heads, and because of that black plague and so on and so forth, everything we are suffering because of this. So it's our mission now to end this. So
Hmm.
this was something which he posited. That was my point. That's it. And आप लोग बोलिए please.
नहीं नहीं, ये जो नेचुरल मोरालिटी वाला पार्ट है ये तो और अगेंस्ट हिस्टोरिसिज्म और हिस्ट्रियोसेंट्रिसिज्म, इस पे मैं एक लिख रहा हूँ। तो वो था, आई थिंक वो स्प्लिट में ही आएगा, स्प्लिट वाला जो बुक लिख रहा हूँ उसी पे आएगा। और ये तो सच है ना, बिकॉज फर्स्ट व्हाट दे डिड, दे created this historiocentricity, right, of their religion, and tried to explain everything from that historiocentric approach, right, अगेंस्ट द नेचुरल कन्वेंशन। तो पहले तो ट्राइबलिज्म, जितना भी ट्राइबल कल्चर था, बेसिकली जो नेटिव कल्चर होता है, उनको खत्म किया, सेइंग कि दीज आर बार्बर्स एंड व्हाट नॉट, राइट। बगैर उनसे कुछ सीखे भी ना, उनको खत्म कर दिया बेसिकली। नाउ खत्म करने के बाद उन्होंने अपना कल्चर भी खत्म किया, जो भी उनका ट्रेडिशन था, बुक बर्निंग हो गया, अपना सारे जो ऑब्वियसली एक जो ऑर्गेनिक इवोल्यूशन हो रहा था ग्रीको रोमन सिविलाइजेशन का, उसको ख़त्म किया, स्कल्पचर ख़त्म किया, ओरिजिनल सीन के फॉर्म में ये सब वियर्ड, मतलब चैस्टिटी, ये सब लाया जो उनका हिस्सा नहीं था। टू द एक्सटेंट कि जब पॉम्पेई में अपना स्कल्पचर निकल रहा है जिसमें लाइक देयर आर दिस ब्राजन शोकेसिंग ऑफ न्यूडिटी जब दिख रहा है, दे स्टार्टेड टू बिकम अशेम्ड, टू द एक्सटेंट कि छुपाने लगा ये सब चीज़ों को, राइट। अब वो जो क्वीन एलिजाबेथ था, शी बिकेम अशेम्ड कि बाप रे बाप, इतना मतलब इतना मतलब हमारा इंसिस्टर इतना ज़्यादा घटिया होता था, कोट अनकोट, राइट। तो उन्होंने म्यूजियम पीसेस जिसको म्यूजियम में ओपन रखना चाहिए उनको छुपाना चालू किया, काफ़ी चीज़ों को अप्रोप्रिएट कर दिया कि अगर कोई न्यूड पेंटिंग दिख रहा है उसके आगे एक फिग लगा दिया टाइप ऑफ, ठीक है। अपना कल्चर ख़त्म किया, सारे बुक्स ख़त्म किए। और फिर जब लोग पूछने लगे कि यार मतलब तो फिर हम लोग है कौन। फिर गलत हिस्ट्री, आर्टिफिशियली क्रिएटेड हिस्ट्री, वो सब छापने लगे। ऑब्वियसली द पॉइंट इज, ट्रूथ इज लाइक, जैसे मैं बोलता हूँ, ट्रूथ इज लाइक एन एंटायर ट्री, राइट? कि एक जो रित होता है, रित के पार्ट होता है सत्य, कि इट्स लाइक ब्रांचिंग, राइट? कि अलग अलग सत्य एक जगह आके मिलता है, विच इज रित। तो ट्रूथिंग लाइक ट्रूथ्स आर कॉन्सिस्टेंट विद ईच अदर। अगर लग सकता है कि ठीक है, अपेरेंटली दे आर एनोमलस, बट इफ यू गो डीपर यू विल फाइंड कि अच्छा ठीक है, इट इज कॉन्सिस्टेंटली कनेक्टेड टू सम, मतलब टू सम रिथ, राइट? So truths can never contradict each other. It can be harsh, but they cannot contradict each other. But false, मतलब falsehood, there is very मतलब small chance. I mean, mathematically the probability is zero that two falsehood will sit together. तो अगर falsehood के basis पे अगर कोई civilization खड़ा करते हो, तो उसमें paradox रह ही जाएगा। और इसीलिए ये लोग इंस्टीट्यूशन बनाए कि थोड़ा व्हाइट वॉश कर सके, कुछ कुछ जो पजल एनोमली आ रहा है उनको थोड़ा रिजॉल्व कर सके। इनका इनका इंस्टीट्यूशन, ये चार्ज वार्ज और इनका काम क्या होता है? व्हाइट वॉशिंग होता है। चार्ज का इससे इससे ज्यादा काम कुछ होता ही नहीं है ना, कि ये सार्मन वर्मन करते हैं। सार्मन किस लिए करते हैं? कुछ कुछ नैरेटिव दे दूं जिससे थोड़ा बहुत कुछ झूठ को हम लोग उस पर पर्दा डाल सके, राइट? या फिर पॉलिटिक्स में कोई बात चल रहा है तो कुछ फॉल्सहुड के थ्रू कुछ बखेड़ा खड़ा है। हाँ, वी डोंट केयर अबाउट ऑल दिस थिंग्स ना, इसलिए टेम्पल ओपन है, कोई भी जाओ, प्रणाम करके माथा टेक के आओ। हमें ये सब फॉल्सहुड क्रिएट करने के वी आर नॉट इवन इंटरेस्टेड, बिकॉज वो हजारों सालों से ऐसे ही चला आ रहा है। दीज आर पार्ट ऑफ आवर कल्चर, आवर नेचुरल मोरालिटी, आवर ऑर्गेनिक मोरालिटी। ठीक है, मतलब बिकॉज इट इज ट्रू, वी डोंट नीड टू क्रिएट फॉल्सहुड फ्रॉम आवर टेम्पल्स। और ये बेसिकली मोटा मोटा जो थिंकिंग है, अब इसको ऑब्वियसली एक वो फिलोसॉफिकल ढांचे में डालूंगा, बट इट इज डेफिनेटली गोइंग टू बी देयर इन आवर नेक्स्ट बुक।
Okay. So thank you, Bijita. Thank you, Rishi. So probably next week we will start our next series, Indian political theory. So
Yes,
so we are working on the framework.
right.
So thank you very much. Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.
जय श्री राम, वंदे मातरम, जय हिंद।
जय श्री राम, वंदे मातरम।